Recording in progress.
All right. So folks, can we get started? This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. I'm Lyle Baker, the chair, but I'm going to turn the meeting conduct over to the vice chair. I will not be here for the city council meeting in which this matter will be reported. Tonight's meeting will be reported, and he's offered to do that. And so I want to make sure that he has an opportunity to be fully involved in it. So we turn over the chair and the meeting to him. So thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, sir. And the good news is Councilor Baker's still here, so it still needs to be under best behavior. But we are being audio and video recorded. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. I'm joined in the room by committee members and councilors Getz, Albright, Baker, and myself, Oliver. And online, councilors Krinsman, Wright. We have other.
Councilor Kalis.
Hello.
Also, there you are, sorry, there, you have Councilor Kalis, you're right in front and on top. But I immediately jumped into other councilors who are with us tonight. I have Councilor Lucas. Do I have anyone else? Councilors that I can see. We are joined by multiple members of the city staff, as you might imagine. And tonight we are going to start off, and I'm going to have everyone kind of introduce themselves as we go along. Because there is quite a few items to get through this evening. We are going to start with 4 appointments. Am I turning these over to you, sir, Mr. Assistant, or should I just run through? Running through them. The first item is 6325, appointment of Andrew Capellotti to the Economic Development Commission. If you'd like to join us at the table. Generally, we give you the opportunity to kind of talk to us about your experience, your interest in bringing to help here in the city. And then we have a few questions, but I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Sure. Well, thank you, councilors. Happy to be here. Andrew Capellotti, 63 Broken Tree Road in Newton. I've been a Newton resident now for 23 years. I've been raised 2 children here, first in a home that we had in the north side of town and now on the south side of town over in Ward 8. Our background and experiences in construction and real estate development. I've been doing that for 35 years, primarily building and developing lots of housing all over sort of eastern Massachusetts. I work for a Boylston Property Company where I'm a principal. And just recently, our big project was we redeveloped the Arsenal Mall into Arsenal Yards. A project that added about 1 million square feet in Watertown, lab, retail, housing, hotel. And that project alone produced about $8 million in additional real estate taxes for the city of Watertown. Plus, I have a ancillary benefit, so I sort of get the relationship between real estate development and economic development. And certainly as it relates to growth in the city of Newton and other municipalities. So my interest in serving on the committee is sort of born out of my experience and sort of recognizing that I think real estate development is an important component to economic development. So any questions that we have?
Fantastic, thank you for that. Are there any questions from the committee? Councilor Albright.
So I'll start by saying thank you for being willing to serve. You know, the council has spent a lot of time bemoaning lately the lack of commercial development in Newton. And, you know, we understand the collapse of the office space market. But can you imagine what future there might be for commercial development in Newton?
That's a very good question. You know, you certainly have to get rid of the current sort of supply of existing office before you're really ever going to see anyone going forward, unless you probably have a tenant in hand and could do a build to suit. And those are probably gonna be unusual as well, because any good business person wouldn't go ahead and spend 2 times to produce new office what they could rent the existing office for, so. I know that there have been some anecdotes just recently in the market, 100,000 square foot lease on Grove Street that I think some people sort of point to as office success. And that's not gonna generate new office, that's really just moving one vacancy from Waltham, or creating a vacancy in Waltham and moving it to Newton, so we're in the life science business. I think that the life science market will come back before the office market comes back. I think there are just too many choices in regard to work from home. It's hard to do science from home. So, but we still have a tremendous amount of existing life science space that needs to be absorbed, so. I personally, we've developed office products in the past. I'll be retired before we develop another office product. In my opinion, so
So it's sort of a wait and see kind of an answer.
it's gonna be a long wait and see. I just think there's way too much inventory, existing inventory, in the submarket.
I had heard that the Grove Street project was. The person that company that's moving over was offered some ownership in the building, which changed the dynamics of that particular.
That could be, office
Yeah.
landlords are being very creative. And trying to attract tenants, and we get into amenitization issues, and you get into where can my employees go for lunch, and is there a gym in the building, do we have roof decks, do we have all sorts of different things that just are kind of creating sort of a have and have not kind of environment, so ownership. I don't know that to be true or not, but I wouldn't be surprised, that was offered.
Well, I just thank you for being involved because, getting real life experience involved on the, in the real estate part of it.
Mhm.
I don't know that we have anybody else on the commission that does that kind of work, so,
I don't believe that you do,
no, so thank you for that.
thank you.
Counselor Wright.
Kind of in the same vein, so, our commercial, not just office, but commercial is 15%. And in the last 10 years, it's gone down to 11%, which puts the tax burden on the residents. What are your ideas to attract commercial businesses?
Well, to attract commercial businesses, I believe you need to be providing housing. And I think Newton does a really lousy job of creating housing. And so until we sort of look at those things in totality, you can't be shutting out housing and then trying to attract people to move here, because then they end up with employees with really long commutes. Because we forced a lot of those 25 to 44-year-olds, unfortunately, a lot further west, so. If we want to attract commercial real estate and jobs, we also need to sort of, the housing needs to go hand in hand. And I think that's been the governor and lieutenant governor's charge. Here over the last, year plus, 220,000 units short. 8 or 10,000 of those are probably right here in our community. I own a single family home. I'd love for us to get the commercial tax base up, so that my real estate taxes went down. But I think that those things have to be considered in totality.
So, Commodore Builders are buying the Rockport building in West Newton. How to attract, I mean, I don't have any preview to how they got there, but how could we do more of that?
Well, that's an interesting, that's a great question. I don't know what brought, Commodore, I know Joe Balvanese, I know they were here in Newton, they went to Waltham, it was an opportunity for him to come back, there was an existing building that was available. I think we probably have a fair amount of existing buildings that may be available. The city needs to, we need to be doing some outreach to those small businesses. I don't know that I have any specific answers as to how you're gonna bring jobs and people back to the city.
So the company you work for has business and opportunities in Newton.
Mhm.
What would you consider as to being on the EDC, a conflict of interest, and would you excuse yourself?
I would yes, I would recuse myself if we have an issue that sort of directly affected the 78 Craft Street project that you referred to. That project is approved. I don't know that I can see that as a conflict of interest going forward, but
Well, I'm thinking more of other projects that possibly that you. Be
I
invested.
like anyone else that has business that is on a committee that ends up with business in front of the city would recuse myself, yes.
Okay. Okay, that's it for right now.
I've got Counselor Kalis, I think. Nope, now I've got Counselor, did you put your hand down? Yeah, Counselor Kalis, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't really have as much of a question, but I just want to speak to my knowledge of Mr. Coppola. He is pragmatic, and he's a straight shooter. So he's not going to tell you things that you want to hear. He's going to tell you things that he believes are accurate and true, which I respect. So at the right time, I would move his approval.
Great, thank you, sir. We've got a couple of additional hands, but we'll come back to you when that motion, when we're ready for that motion. Thank you. Counselor Katz?
Yeah, just a quick question. We have one site that is potentially changing right now in terms of the office space at the
Mhm.
Northland side.
Yep.
And it was sold as a live work play site, you know, just in terms of having the proximity of residential housing right next to a workplace.
Mhm.
So, and I was hopeful that, you know, we would have more of these kinds of sites, you know, on the city, and this is one site that is 10 acres. So it really begs to have that kind of model.
Mhm.
Any opinion on Northland? Are you?
I believe, again, I have lots of opinions on Northland. The world is just a different place, and there isn't a bank that's gonna finance new office, and as much as we all want that commercial component to be there to exist, it's just not in the cards, and I think that for Northland and for that project, making that change is a necessity. At the end of the day, real estate developers, I years ago for John and Corcoran. I had the John and Corcoran company, and John said to me, he said, you know, commercial developers live better, residential developers sleep better. And by that, he meant this, that commercial developers, the reason they live better is because you can make a lot more money developing commercial real estate. Sign 10-year leases, with office tenants, with 3% escalators, and you really create a tremendous amount of value. And so Northland is not doing this because they want to do it. They're doing it because they have to do it. And that's an important point that I think is sort of seems to be lost on a lot of people. The opportunity for them to make money in that project was probably predicated on having that office component and having that commercial space. So they're in a tough spot. We have Arsenal Yards we sort of did that project. It is a live work play. We have 400,000 square feet of life science. We have one tenant who was going out on us at 63,000 feet, and you know we're not collecting rent on that space, and we're trying to release the space, but we couldn't build new space today if we wanted to. We couldn't get it financed, so but we're out in a very, very competitive sublease market, trying to find another tenant to take either some of that space or ideally all of it, but you know, it's tough out there in the commercial office in particular because of work from home.
But do you see this something projecting in 5 years? Do you see it like?
If I knew, I wouldn't be here on television.
Okay.
So, you know,
Well, technically, so you are on.
You know, it depends on so many factors. I think it's probably 7 to 10 years. You just gotta think about, you know, you gotta look at what the absorption in the current office market has been over the last couple of years. Look at is available to be absorbed. And I think if you do that math, it's roughly 8 years. Will we have some years where we double absorption, and can you know, make 8.6? Probably, maybe. Tell me where interest rates are going, tell me what's gonna happen with tariffs and recessions and all of these other things, and I could give you a better answer. So,
That's it for me.
All set, great. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you. Here I am. Mr. Capoletti, thank you for willing to serve on the Economic Development Commission. I think it was almost 3 years ago when we first met. I think we were across the hall when we were first discussing the Boylston Properties project. I think it was me, you, I know Councilor Albright, former Councilor Norton was there. So I've been following your particular project on Craft Street very closely, as you can imagine. But we're here to talk about the Economic Development Commission. And you said something earlier that I'm like, I don't know if that's right. But you said in order to have more commercial development in Newton must first create more housing. I think I heard that correct, right, sir?
I believe I said that they sort of go hand in hand, and
Okay.
without housing, employers will make, as they make decisions about where they want to, you know, where they want locate their companies, housing is, I think, a very critical key component to that decision making. So whether you need commercial first and housing second, or housing first and commercial, you need them really sort of both to happen organically and at the same time.
And you don't think Newton's done a good enough job over the last 5, 6, 7 years? A little
No,
bit before COVID and since. Well, hold on, hold on.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Capoletti, hold up. You don't
Absolutely
think we haven't done a good job over the last 5 to 7 years trying to build some housing in Newton? We've got a lot of projects that have been approved. I know yours is pending right now, approved but pending, I understand. And there are other projects throughout the city. We passed the VCOD last year or 2 years ago. That's not enough.
It is not nearly enough, no.
Okay, and
Yeah, I believe VCOD is going to produce very little housing.
okay, and you said that we need they go hand in hand, but I also noticed that Watertown and Waltham have built up their commercial sectors over the last, call it decade. Within the last decade, what are they doing with their housing stock? Have they increased their housing stock enough to support all that commercial development?
Well, Watertown has done a good job, I think, of creating housing. I can't speak specifically to Waltham, but Watertown was also the beneficiary of kind of getting early in on life science, and it is probably the third best life science location in the state. It's not because we're there and we own life science, but Alexandria is right next door to us, and there's been a tremendous amount of life science development in the East End. Really, primarily predicated on Arsenal Yards, which is kind of the amenity, if you will, for all of those life science tenants. There's whether it's grocery or movies or fitness or dining, fast casual, all sorts of things. And in fact, the CEO of Joel Marcus, when asked why they bought Arsenal on the Charles, said because we really like that amenity next door, which was Arsenal Yard. So the commercial development in the East End of Watertown, that early adoption to life science really did wonders for the city of Watertown. There is the West End where there have been projects planned. Those are all stalled, and they will be stalled for the foreseeable future, not dissimilar to, I think, what's going to happen in the commercial office market, here in Newton and other communities. So is that
okay? Well, go on. Oh, I thought you weren't done.
No,
Sorry.
I asked if that answered. Did I
Okay.
answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into a back and forth. This is a long night for Zap. I kind of disagree with what you said, so I don't want to push back too much. But you know, Newton, I think, has done a better job than Waltham and Watertown when it comes to building housing and approving housing. You and I might disagree on that, and that's fine, you know. But we have, I think, done a good job. Newton has done a good job in terms of building housing. So, you know, if your appointment is approved, you know, I hope you can help bring some good ideas to the table to bring some commercial development to Newton, because it's been stagnant for the past decade, and we are struggling because of that. So thank you for willing to serve. That's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Counselor. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Counselor Albright.
So I know Watertown, I don't know if Councilor Lucas is aware of it, but they have developed a ton of housing. I mean, I had conversations with the city, is it the city? It's a city, isn't it?
It's-
City councilor. He was telling me how they don't have to have an override because of all of the housing and commercial development that they've done, that they're able to fund their schools, they're just moving along at an amazing pace. And when the mayor talked to us the other night and showed us the new growth, I think Watertown had spurted up to the third largest new growth community after Cambridge, and I forget the other one. Maybe it was Boston, I don't remember, but yeah, Watertown has been amazing. And one of the things that I would love the Development Commission to tell us is, because all of the new projects have to come through the council. So we have to play a role. We have played a role, and we have to play a role in attracting businesses and housing and so forth. So you should tell us what we can do as a council. You, as not you personally, but you as a commission should advise us.
Mhm.
What do we have to do to help in the process? Because we play a role, an important role. So I hope that when you go to the commission, you will
So,
talk
well,
about that problem.
so I'll just having done a permanent 10 buildings in Watertown in the last 8 years, primarily at Arsenal Yards. We did a sort of a master plan. We did an overlay that we created some, what they call the RMUD, which is the Regional Mixed Use District, which is Arsenal Yards plus a variety of other parcels in kind of that east end of Watertown. We did that through the city council. And then after that, I never had to go back to the city council, and all of the stuff that we did was moved through the planning board and was site plan review special permit. So it's my sense here in Newton that the city council has its hands on too many of these things, and sort of slows the process down. If I had to go back, I think, to the city council every time, as opposed to a sort of an all volunteer planning board that's appointed by the city manager. I think you get caught up in the politics here in Newton when you're having to go in front of the city council on a regular basis. So just one comment that I would have, but you know, every community does it differently. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
We've been joined by Counselor Farrell, who has his hand up. Sir, Counselor Farrell, on to you.
Thank you. You can, hope I'm unmuted.
We can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Cavalletti, for your interest in serving on this commission, but I apologize for being a little late, but perhaps you could just briefly share with me and others what your vision is for economic development opportunities in Newton?
Well, sure, Counselor. Well, I come from the real estate development and construction world, and so a lot of my vision is sort of centered around you know, economic development through growth, through redevelopment. And I pointed to my experience with Boylston Properties in Watertown and what we were able to do for Arsenal Yards, the old Arsenal Mall that became Arsenal Yards, and you know, that one project alone, I believe, has added $8 million a year to the city of Watertown. When I started at Boylston Properties in Watertown, In 2016, I think the city budget was $90 million, and I think this year they just cracked $200 million. And a lot of that growth in the budget has come from, as Councilor Albright just sort of pointed out, real estate development and growth. The only two ways to get money, it's either to tax the existing real estate you have or create new real estate development opportunities.
I find your record very impressive, but I guess I would like to understand what your vision is for translating that sort of economic development in Newton specifically.
Well, again, I think it's in helping the city and those people who want to come to the city and develop real estate. It's gonna be in helping them get those projects approved. And I think the Economic Development Council has a role in that and providing the city council with our opinion as to whether or not those projects are going to provide the benefits that the real estate developer thinks that they're going to.
Do you have any sense of
specific vision for what my role will be on a committee that I haven't served on yet?
I understand, but in going on to the commission, do you have a vision of what types of industries or do you?
I'm agnostic.
And
I'm agnostic. Yeah, I guess. Well, I guess I'm agnostic to the types of industries. I think the city of Newton would certainly like to be in the life science business. I think that opportunity has sort of passed us by here in the current environment. And I don't know if you were on, but I said that housing has to be a key component of whatever the vision is. You want to attract commercial tenants. Those commercial tenants really gotta feel like they have a place for their employees to live.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think the city is working on the residential question. And I guess I was hoping that you might have some more illuminating thoughts about what might be possible rather than industries that or time that's passed us by. Whether you think there are things that you would encourage businesses to come to Newton to operate.
Yeah, I don't know that I can really point to give you any very specific answers at this point in time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Wright.
Thank you. So I own, and I used to live in Watertown and own a place there for like 35 years. And I have to say, with all that commercial base, my real estate taxes are going down every year because of the commercial, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So again, if we had more commercial here, that would help in our residential tax base. And they do build there has been quite a bit. I'm on Pleasant Street on the west end of town, so there's a lot building there. But it actually, which seems counterintuitive, kind of puts a lot of pressure on my rents to be higher. And which I do keep them lower, but a lot of the other people are raising the rents because these newer buildings are so much higher. So unfortunately, all that building, from my personal experience, is not really seeing that rents are dropping. In fact, is actually pushing it up. But I have to say though, with the commercial base, it is bringing my taxes down.
Can we vote?
Long night.
Well, I think then, seeing no further hands. And at Councilor Baker's suggestion, returning to the motion by Councilor Kalis. I'm assuming that is a motion to approve, sir, correct?
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. All those in favor, please say aye or show me your hands.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's Councilors Princeman and Kalis are yeses, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Fantastic. Do we have any no's? I have a no. So that's 5-1 to
Abstain.
2 abstentions. Is that correct? One abstention.
One abstention. No, I'm supportive.
You are a yes. Okay, great. So we are 5-1 to 1. Correct? Who are you missing tonight? Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Now, from here, thank you for your willingness to serve. So from here, it'll go to the full city council at our next meeting. My guess is there'll be a little bit of conversation there as well. And then the entire council will vote on your appointment as well. But thank you again for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, correct?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, next Tuesday, right.
stay here.
Thank you. No, thank you, sir. So our next item is 70-25, the appointment of David Edison to the Bordeaux Advisory Commission. So if you'd like to join us up here at the table.
Sure.
Same concept, if you know, have a few words as to, why you're interested in this particular commission. Tell us a little bit about your background, that would be fantastic.
Sure, great. Good evening, everyone. David Edison, 215 Waverly Ave, Ward 7. Have been here for about four or 5 years. I've worked for the Chelmsford Housing Authority for 37 years, 30 years as its director. For over a decade, we have served as the regional capital asset advisory team for over 10,000 units, pretty much all public housing units from Boston to Worcester North. Our agency was selected to do basically a study or retain a firm to look at how we can decarbonize the 43,000 public housing units in the state of Massachusetts. And we're looking at units that were built far back as the 40s or 50s, and as most recently in the last 30 years. And a number of challenges and I've had to work through, and it's been a wonderful experience. We've not moved forward on a number of things, and we've moved forward on some really great initiatives. So I have one project where we just had $5 million come in from the LEAD program to provide all of the decarbonization we needed for a relatively small development. And another $500,000 come in for some other smaller projects. So I'm excited to serve because I've had some real life experience with some very difficult projects.
Fantastic. Any questions? Councilor Wright?
So, thank you for stepping up. And I've seen you in other meetings and you provided a lot of information to those meetings. So you talk about decarbonization of these buildings. How is that different from Bordeaux?
How's it different from Bordeaux?
Which I think Bordeaux is more strict, but I didn't know.
I mean, I can't give you that answer. I don't have that answer for you.
Okay.
But I'm here to learn and I come with some real life experience.
Yeah.
But I lived in Boston, never served in any committee there or in Cambridge.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Baker?
Well, the time comes, I'll be glad to move your approval, but I want to let my colleagues ask questions. I think that you understand that part of the task here is a significant one, which is to help the city administer a rather complicated ordinance. We spent many meetings of this committee pulling all of this together. And in some sense, a chunk of the burden of administration is going to be offloaded to you and your colleagues to devise the process of building regulations and implementation matters, whatever that's going to be. So I appreciate your willingness to serve because this is a very significant initiative on the part of the city, and we're entering what I hate to use the word climate, but somewhat unfriendly climate for this sort of activity. But that's what it is. I grant you may not know exactly what you're going to do yet, but it's the ability to draw on your experience. The context will be valuable.
So I'll just say, part of the wonderful experience that I've had is we have an existing database of every component that exists in every one of the buildings we looked at. So we already had a lot of work done. So as we looked at the projects as we went forward, we already had a database of components of every building. We also had consultants that were assisting us. And there's one more piece that I wanted to share with you. I lost it when I was listening to you so intently.
I'm sure it's gonna come.
It's gonna come back.
I rarely have that effect.
Councilor
thank you.
Katz.
I actually, the real life experience is so valuable, and thank you for stepping up. Monica, do you have those 5 million in the bank? Like, are you,
As you said, we're on TV.
And being recorded.
So,
No, I'm just concerned.
yes, no, it is, the work,
many
no,
things.
the work is started, so
Okay, great, well, that's good news. Okay,
it's excellent.
yes.
All set?
Yes,
Fantastic. Councilor Albright.
So I think you sort of partially answered my question with what you said to Councillor Baker, because what I was wondering is, since you are in the housing business. I was wondering how that's gonna translate to the commercial, because we delayed implementation of housing, but. What I heard and what you just said was that you've done a systematic way of examining the buildings and a database of systematically looking at things and keeping track of various components. So I think that does translate. A building is a building.
Yes and no, but yes, a building is a building, and I will say, you know, we're not all gonna come to the table with experience of housing and commercial. I will bring my knowledge and my experience, and whatever we can transfer over, I'm more than willing to share. And I'm willing to pull up my jeans or my, and get to work, and I'm not afraid of learning new things and being an active participant. And if you see me at the other committee, I'm always happy to take on as much as they'll give me.
thank you.
All set?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Anyone else? No, I'm seeing no other hands. Councilor Baker.
Well, thank you, I'd be delighted to move your appointment, and thank you for your mail.
Great, thank you. Can I get a show of hands from the committee? All those in favor? Please raise your hand, either electronically or right there, 2 on. We've got 2, 4, 5 in the house, so we're 7-0. I'm going to assume that there are no further abstentions because someone would be voting twice, and as we know, I'm the only one who's ever done that. So there we go. All right, thank you, sir. And from here, your appointment will go to the full city council next Tuesday. Feel free to join us at that time if you so wish. No, thank you, sir. All right, the next item is 7225, appointment of Mark Clay to the Berto Advisory Commission. Sir, if you'd like to join us at the table. And as you've seen before, you're being audio and video recorded, you are on TV. But if you just share a few words about your background and why you're interested in this particular commission, that would be very helpful.
My name's Mark Clay. I live at 250 Hammond Pond Parkway in the towers of Chestnut Hill. I've lived there for 4 years, owned for about 6. Moved up here after I retired to be near the grandchildren. I made my living in the oil and gas business in Oklahoma and worked in the business side of an oil and gas exploration company and did marketing. I also did business development in that my boss was pitched a lot of opportunities and I was responsible for reviewing those. And we also owned a building, so I was involved in the total gutting of the building and redoing everything in it. The building was built in 1902, it's the oldest standing building in Oklahoma City, and it's been totally modernized. I'm interested in joining the Berto Commission because I believe climate change is real and we need to do everything we can to become carbon neutral as soon as possible. I also believe in equity, and as the chair of the board of trustees of the towers of Chestnut Hill, I've seen firsthand how building operations intersect with sustainability, cost, and community well-being. Joining the Berto Commission would allow me to bring a practical building level perspective to the table, one informed by direct experience navigating the challenging opportunities to implement greener policies at the building I managed in Oklahoma City. I'm also deeply in line with a commitment to equity, transparency, and ensuring that climate policy reflects the needs of all living communities. I'd be honored to contribute my experience and on-the-ground insight to support Berto's mission and help shape a more sustainable and green future for Newton.
Fantastic, thank you, sir. Anyone on the committee? Councilor Albright.
I just have to say first that it's really exciting to have the 3 of you here tonight. Beginning the implementation of this Birdo that we talked about for so long. And it's really gonna happen now, so it's just very exciting. And I think we first met in the chamber when you came to support and listen to the conversation about Birdo, so you really were there on the ground floor. And so the building that you own is a commercial building, or
I didn't own it, I worked for the owner. But
was it commercial building?
yes, so it was an office building, the first floor was retail tenants, and then 4 floors were used for office space. We occupied 2 floors and I leased out the other 2 floors.
And were you involved with the sustainability of that building?
Sure, I was in charge of all the maintenance, I replaced compressors, we had to redo a lot of stuff. The building was basically hadn't really been adjusted since the 50s. So we replaced the boiler, put in a greener boiler, had to remove asbestos everywhere, put in a new HVAC system everywhere. Just, it was down to the concrete walls.
Great, well, it's great to have you be willing to serve and to have some real down to the, feet on the ground experience, so thank you very much.
All set?
Yeah.
Great, Councilor Ray.
So thank you for wanting to serve.
Sure.
So your experiences with the gas and oil, and this is we're trying to get off of it completely. With Birdo, like we're not allowing, except for rare circumstances, any gas hookup, it's all electric. What from your past will help in this situation?
Well, I sort of understand how all that stuff works. I haven't, in the building, when we redid compressors and stuff, I made sure that we had the leading technology. Now, in the Birdo case, it's not gonna really make much difference what anybody did in the past because all this stuff is new. So it's all about getting to electricity use that's based on renewable sources. So I'm a big believer in what I used to do, probably shouldn't happen anymore. Because I have a son and his wife, and their 2 kids that I'm worried about what's gonna go on here. My 2 grandchildren are very green. If you go to Earth Day, you'll see them at Green Newton's booth. Passing out brochures and building Lego projects, so I'm committed to the concept and I understand that the past needs to stay in the past, but you can't just say, on this day, we're not doing anything because there's no way to get there, like at the towers. There's no way to even, if we put in a new electric boiler today, there's no way to fuel it because there isn't the electricity capacity to get to the building. So if we wanted to turn it on, we couldn't run it. So all these things have to come together to make all these things work.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other hands and our Ward 6 counselor is.
I'll be happy to move approval.
Thank you very much. That's what I was angling for. Can I get a show of hands again from members of the committee? We have a motion to approve, right? I've got 1, 2 online and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the room. So we're 7-0 again on that appointment. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Sure.
As I've mentioned previously, we'll be discussing this or taking this item up at the full city council next Tuesday.
Thank you.
You're welcome to join us if you would like.
Yeah.
And finally, but far from least, our last appointment of the night is item 7425. The appointment of Dante Capasso to the Birdo Advisory Commission. He is already at the table.
Good evening.
And if you have some words, it is more than okay.
Worship that for me. So, sorry.
Fantastic. If you have any words of wisdom to share, now it's yours.
Briefly introduce myself, Dante Capasso, 500 Street, New Mass. My family, principal at Capasso Realty, 3rd generation family owned owners, builders and managers, what we call ourselves. We own about 300 apartment units in Newton, spread across about a dozen buildings. and another about 250,000 square feet of office and industrial, again in Newton, spread across other dozen or so buildings. And I'm very eager to serve on this commission and on my expertise.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Question from Councilor Princeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Dante. Josh Princeman, City Councilor, Ward 4.
Good evening.
Just want to say that Mr. Capasso has been an excellent landlord, an excellent contributor to Ward 4 city issues. He's been a voice of reason on a number of different issues. Every time I consult with him or reach out to him, I think he's been responsive, level-headed, pragmatic, reasonable. He's been involved also in this particular ordinance that he's going to be helping to work on the commission for from the beginning. So I think I really can't say enough positive. I think he's the ideal person to serve on this commission. So I'll move approval, and then you can, have your discussion, but happy to move approval of this nomination.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions?
I just want to say thank you, because I know you've been involved from the very beginning
That I have.
and helping to advise us on which ways to move in the ordinance, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Councilor Getz.
I too, thank you for serving, but more importantly, you have been so integral in terms of the whole process, I mean, for years. So all of that knowledge will be wonderful to apply to the actual formation of the next step, in terms of the next group.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing no further questions.
I have a-
I'm sorry.
Just a general question. How many people are going onto this committee?
It's 7.
I
So there's
think
some
the
more?
total number was 7, if I recall, and there were 3 from the president and 4 from. Well, the mayor has 4 appointees, but there were designations from NCCE, Green Newton, and where there was an overarching or perhaps underlying, depending on how you want to look at it, requirement for some level of technical capacity. Not of all members, but within the board.
Yeah.
I believe the engineering / technical understanding of the issues at hand. In other words, those really, really big numbers that have all the letters and acronyms and things after them, somebody knows what all those mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I have some of those.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, you do count, absolutely. And speaking of counting, everyone.
He has a technical Capasso T.
Yeah, sorry, Councilor Andrew Lee for the city.
I apologize if I misheard, but the Berto Advisory Commission has 9 members in total, 4 appointed by the mayor, 4 appointed by the president of the city council, and then 1 appointed by the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy.
Great, thank you for the correction, I appreciate that.
Just as an aside, it would have been nice to know who appointed the 3 that came through us tonight, whether it was the mayor or us. It's in.
Well, it's in there.
It did say-
The first
in the
was the
document?
mayor, the next 3 were.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was
That's
being
all right.
tight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
All right, so we're back to Councilor Princeman's motion. All in favor, please raise your hand, either in the room or online. I have 2 online, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the room, so we are again 7-0. Fantastic, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I will add my thank yous to your willingness to serve. Next Tuesday, we'll be bringing this up in the full council. You're more than welcome to join us or join us from home, and you can view on UTV.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
I appreciate that. And you're more than welcome to stay and listen to the remainder of our debate. That is also okay. You can join us on TV as we've been talking. Thank you, sir. All right, fantastic. So now, we have, and I believe we're discussing the next 2 items together. 4424 and 4524, requesting the reevaluation and possible amendments to inclusionary zoning ordinance, as well as the possibility of including training within said ordinance. I'm turning it over to yourself, Barney.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Fantastic.
So Kyle and Jason are here from RKG. I just checked with them. This is their 3rd time before the committee. They did a kickoff. Then they covered part 1 of the IZ ordinance. So I think they're here tonight to recap part 1, and then really get into part two of the meeting. So they have a presentation to present.
Oh, yeah, well, of course, yeah, please do join us at the table. And when, are you gonna be navigating here? Yes, yeah.
Yes, I will be now.
Great, and obviously, you're more than welcome to join us at the table as well. Okay,
We're
fair
fine
enough.
for the moment.
All right.
Yeah. But you do have good snacks, that looks like.
Yeah. I think we have them all, actually.
We've learned over time that food and fluids are healthy.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having us back. Just a reminder, I'm Kyle Talenti, I'm the president of RKG Associates. As Barney mentioned, tonight we're gonna hopefully cover the second tranche of areas that we were asked to review and come up with some suggestions for consideration for the city as it moves forward with its IZ revisions. And so if you wouldn't mind, next please. The first couple of slides are just kind of just a refresher for everybody's memory, understanding the income levels by different AMIs. And this is important from the perspective of, if you remember from the last time, one of the recommendations that we put forward was to remove the tier 2, which is the 80% to 110% of AMI, and then move that requirement into a slightly higher tier 1 for 20 to 99 units and 100 plus units. And so we're just kind of showing where the tier 1 range is, which is the 50 to 80, with the average of 65 for those of you who are keeping track at home. And then just wanted to show what those numbers are so people have a sense of what that is. So the next, please.
That's 2025 numbers.
Yes, no, 24. The 25 numbers are coming out any day now. Yes. Oh, well, that's why I said any day now. It's very much like census information. They generally release it late spring, but some years it's earlier than others. You just don't know when it's gonna happen. So one of the questions that Barney or that the team asked us was, should we relook at the definition of the term inclusionary unit? And the short answer to that is yes, because as we said, we're talking about eliminating tier 2, the 80 to 110%, and just having a tier 1. So that would by definition require you to change the language in the document, because in the definition of inclusionary unit, there's tier 1 and tier 2. And so we would encourage you to remove the tier 2 from the inclusionary zoning policy, and then just change it to what we're recommending there, which is inclusionary units mean any deed restricted housing unit priced to be affordable to households with an annual gross income at or below 80% of AMI. Because that, the blending 65 is, the technical is between 50 and 80 with an average of 65, which generally everyone then just says half 50, half 80. But this is, so defined just as anything 80% or below, which then opens the door if someone wants to do something less than 50% or less, or something different than that, it doesn't exclude it from being part of the inclusionary definition. So that would be our recommendation on that. So next, please. The mandatory provision of IZ units, is the bonus section effective? So one of the questions that they asked us is, can you look at, is it right now in the policy, it says with basically the relationship is 2 market rate units for every 1 affordable, using the average unit sizing, and then 3 market rate for every 1 affordable for a 3-bedroom. And so we tested that theory, and unfortunately, in today's current market conditions, it would require 3 market rate units to do 1 normal IZ unit, and it would be 5 market rate to do a 3-bedroom. The valuation difference and the impact on the revenue of a project is more than what the current bonus density policy allows for. That being said, we also don't think it's a good time for the city to change the bonus density policy and just leave it as is, even though it's really not likely to be used in the short term. By leaving it the way it is, it allows, if market conditions correct themselves, and we can spend several hours talking about what that's gonna look like over the next 6 to 9 months, but the reality is our recommendation, we leave it as is. If market conditions change and maybe it becomes more viable in the future, but you can always relook at it at some point in time. And our number one concern is that if you're talking about 3 units for everyone affordable, or 5, when you're doing a small project, and you say, okay, I want you to do another affordable, well, now it goes from a 5-unit project to a 10-unit project. And we know that there's a lot of sensitivity right now in the community around projects getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I think that there would be a rub between trying to mathematically make the policy functional and the political reality or the implementation reality of having to meet those requirements or having to provide those requirements. So for us, the recommendation right now is leave the bonus density section as is. You could always look at that sometime in the future, because as you all know, we're already making some recommendations elsewhere in the policy, and we don't like trying to do wholesale complete. It can create more challenges than it solves when you move too much at one time. So this is what we don't think we would encourage you to change right now. Next. The cash payment option. We talked about this a little bit last time, but I wanted to bring it back up. Right now, the city uses their TDC approach, which is the way it's calculated is they average the last 3 years of projects delivered in the city that receive some sort of subsidy dollar, whether it's federal, state, or local. And that's how they came up with the $550,000 a few years ago, and that's how they're coming up with the $650,000 recommended change. If you remember from when we were here in 18-19, and then again is we also look at it from what's called a value gap approach, which looks at the difference in value of a market rate unit to a deed restricted unit. And we also look at a construction cost unit, not necessarily for a subsidized project, but for a project that's going to be more not more, it's going to be subject to the IG policy. Projects that are receiving federal subsidies are usually all or substantially all income controlled units, and so they're really outside the IZ, the intended IZ policy. That's not what it was written for. It was written for the private development. And so we're just showing you some of the numbers that came out of our analysis this go around. And the punchline is that the TDC number is a little bit higher than if you used a value gap approach, which is the difference between market and income controlled, and then the construction cost of a non-subsidized unit. And so construction costs, if you remember, and those of you who were around 5 years ago, I know you put this to memory. The construction cost numbers in our recommendation is usually used for if I'm buying out or delivering a unit, because you as a community want to make sure you're getting enough dollars to be able to build that unit somewhere else. Whereas the value gap approach is a little bit more comparable to when I'm making changes within my on-site project. So you want me to round up, or you want me to pay a partial unit payment. If I end up at 1.4 units, that 0.4 units, if I make a payment, it should be the difference in the value of what I'm getting, not necessarily the full construction cost. If you're looking at it from a financial feasibility, a revenue neutral perspective. And so those are generally the way they do it. However, despite that fact, right now, the way the policy is written, the market has normalized to the number you have. We're going to show you some instances where the proposed TDC may create some challenges if you want to look at different opportunities. But I don't know if we would do a change to the TDC at all right now. Just because we want to make sure that you're providing opportunities. And if, for example, you want to do a payment in lieu, if a project is located in a part of the community that is not opportune for transportation or access to jobs or access to stores or access to healthcare, maybe there's some value to capturing revenue instead of delivering the units. Well, it becomes challenging if the amount of money that they have to pay is greater than the benefit they're getting from not delivering the unit on site.
TDC, what does that stand for?
Total development cost.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just as long as we're clarifying, I'm assuming that what we're saying here is continue to use TDC as the approach.
Correct.
And the amount is already at 650,000, is that correct? I just wanted to make sure, because
I think the last update was 650, correct?
okay, somewhere between 2020 and where we are currently, I'm assuming. Because it looks like it was 550, 19.
I think so, because we have to do it every 3 years.
I think it was
22 then.
Don't quote me on this, but I think in recollecting the information with that, it was in 2024.
24, okay, fantastic. Oh, sorry, Ms. Kreitzer, you got your hand up. My guess is with all the information we need.
Hi, sorry, it took me a minute there. Yeah, we, excuse me, the housing partnership updated it in July of 22.
Okay.
So following the 3 years, yes.
Oh, so it's gonna be updated again in a couple months?
Yeah, we should probably look at it again in the summer.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you for keeping us honest. All right. Oh, sorry, Councilor Getz.
Well, I'm just, it seems like we're delving into questions, but I'm looking at this slide. Well, the difference, I'm sorry to even ask this question, but the difference between wood frame versus podium. I'm assuming podium is a different form of construction?
Yes, so the ground floor is concrete and steel,
Okay.
and the floors above it are wood frame.
Okay.
So most building codes, you can do up to 5 stories, all wood frame construction, so 2x4s. You can do a 6th story where the ground floor is concrete and steel and the 5 stories above it are wood frame. And then when you get above that, it all has to be concrete and steel. It's a safety issue.
Unless
But
you're
they're-
Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee, they're doing like 24 stories, so we're.
Well, they have a new wood, material. It's not traditional, it's a treated lumber that they claim has a similar burning properties as concrete and steel. And so but unfortunately, the cost of that wood material is similar to, it's a little bit less than steel. It's not the same as a traditional, pine 2x4, if you will. Yes, but there are some communities that are going to that different wood technology. Maybe that's the best way of putting it.
There you go. Thank you.
And so the other thing is that one of the things that we think, even if you don't change the number or the approach, is to consider for projects under 20 units to allow them to provide a cash payment instead of delivering the units in the project. And the reason why that is that what we have heard through interviews with both staff and the development community is in those smaller projects, 7, 8, 9 unit projects, the administration, the monitoring of a single unit can be very challenging both for the developer and for the community. And as a result, providing them the opportunity to provide a cash payment, you can then cluster that money and then go into a much larger project that you can be part of a investment into a project that's, for example, using low-income housing tax credits, and you can get to deeper subsidies in that regard, and you're putting in a project where those support services and that development typology is going to be more appropriate and easier to manage and more efficient. And so, and other communities are doing, this is not something that will be unique to Newton. There are other communities here in the Boston metro area that are allowing projects under 20 units to do a cash payment for what they owe in terms of units. And you would be just using that $650,000 calculation.
Per unit, right.
Yeah.
Councilor Baker.
So let me be clear, 2 things. One is Mr. Lee is here, and at some point, this gets translated into a change in language in our ordinance. So I want to just be sensitive to whatever that process requires and the timing of it. But the other part is, just to be clear, this would be, I think, a significant change from the model we currently have. Because the model we currently have has been saying that you could do, I think, 5 units. There was a threshold at which you had to start providing an actual unit rather than cash.
Yes.
So I just want to be clear about it. What you've indicated so far has been rather modest changes, if any, but this is I think, a significant one our colleagues will be interested to hear about, because it would make a significant shift in sort of the incentive structure for smaller projects. And I think move people to either do smaller than or bigger, but the magic number will no longer be 5 or 6. It'll be some economically driven below 20, right?
Well, so one of the things we talked about last time is the potential to move down to 4. Instead of starting at, so right now it starts at 7.
Right.
And we talked about the potential to move down to 4. But like I said, one of the things we've been hearing through this process is the larger challenge, particularly for the property owners. If I'm doing a 7-unit project and I have to provide one income controlled unit, the challenge of I'm not really built for that. That's not my business model. Oftentimes project developers doing those small projects aren't institutional builders that own hundreds and hundreds of units. And so it's challenging. And so there's an opportunity for the city to consider, which is like, we're going to capture the value of that unit, which would be the $650,000 that we can then use somewhere else in a project that would create a greater level of efficiency of monitoring and operating, and also could be used to augment either greater levels of affordability or deeper levels of subsidy, because you can provide more resources into a project.
No, I'm not quarreling with the rationale.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that we need to be clear with our colleagues, because I think there's.
That's a
That's it.
Well, absolutely, you know, and look, once again, so we're trying to come up with ideas that help you get to. Really where we're coming at all of this from is how do we find ways to make the policy more effective and efficient at meeting the goals as they have been described to us. And without just wholesale complete changes everywhere. Some of them will be small, some of them we won't be any changes at all. And I think this is an opportunity for the city to consider that could create a new opportunity that is a little bit more substantial, to your point.
Councilor Wright.
So I'd like to discuss this in more detail. I don't know if you want to do it right now or.
I would prefer to kind of get through,
Okay,
because I think
that's
there are
fine.
a few other points here that are gonna influence
Absolutely.
that. Is that all right with you, Councilor?
Yep,
Yes,
Yep,
great.
yep.
All right,
So next, please. And this is just an example where we started mapping out a 15-unit project, for example, to kind of show you the impact that these kind of decisions have on the feasibility of a project. So, you know, whether you're following the current roundup approach, which is at 1 is it 4.5, Jason? Right, yeah. At 0.45, you round up to the next whole unit. You know, in this particular project, you would owe 2 units. You can see what the return is. To do a roundup and a fee in lieu where I can pay you the differential, they would be putting in $1.3 million. They would have to pay for the 2 units. The alternative is the partial payment, which we've talked about before, where at 1.65, whatever it is, you just have to pay 65% of the value of the unit. You wouldn't have to pay the full value of the unit. Or you would have to deliver a whole unit. So it creates just different alternatives. One of the other things that I think this benefits the city is it creates a new revenue stream for your trust. Which then also can be used for additional housing types of projects. So where right now the roundup delivers more units, there's a way maybe you could get a better opportunity through using that money strategically, like I mentioned, other projects. So this is just, we wanted to give a math example of what that would mean, looking at some of the different alternatives that are on the table and how that could, how that could be influenced, how it could influence the.
Councilor Wright.
I have a clarifying question on this. So in Newton right now, this is in general terms. If a project is about 30 units or less, it's condos. Very seldom is it rentals. Does this still hold true if it was condos? Because we're talking about under 20 units, and almost all the under 20 units are condos.
I don't know that off the top of my head, because we're looking at the rental numbers right now, and so we can get you that answer for you the next time we come back.
Because I only know of like one project that's
Okay.
in this numbers that is rentals, but I know a bunch of them that are condos.
I will make sure we get that answer to you guys as soon as we can.
Can I just ask about
Of
the
course,
last line in the chart, partial payment plus fee in lieu? So how do you come up with the 975?
Because the partial payment, you owe 1.5 units. And so then you would only have to pay the equivalent of 1.5 units.
Okay.
And at $650,000, the one is 650,000 and a half is 375,000
Okay,
or 300, whatever.
325.
Yeah, thank you. So that's how it comes to 975.
and the roundup and fee in lieu, it comes to 1.3.
Because right now under the policy, because this lands at 1.5, they would owe 2
Okay,
under your current policy.
okay.
All set?
Yep.
Great.
Next, please. So offsite development, does the offsite development section need to be revised? What needs to be revised is our recommendation is to come up with what a unique benefit is to the city. It's right now, the only thing that it says in the policy is an unusual net benefit to the city, but it doesn't explain what that is. And there are other communities that use this approach where they say, look, if you want to do offsite, then one, they set parameters, like it can't be more than a mile away from the original development site, or it has to be in the same neighborhood, or it has to be, you can set different parameters of what that means of how far you're allowed to go offsite. But they also oftentimes ask for more. They say, okay, if we're gonna allow you to do off-site, then we want a 25% increase in the calculation of the number of units. So if you owe us 10, now you owe us 12 and a half. And so there's some unusual net benefit that the city wants to receive in exchange for not delivering units on site. And this oftentimes is tied around, most communities want to see price diversity in projects. They don't want to see one area of a community where we build all the market rate units, and then another area of the community where we build all the income controlled units. Because land is cheaper, or because it's a less desirable place to blah, 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 blah. And so for our recommendation is, let's come up with a specific definition of what unusual net benefit is. And we made 3 recommendations, the 3 most common that communities go after, which is either a higher set aside percentage. And we recommend consideration of a 25% more units above what we're already asking for. They'll oftentimes will ask for a lower target AMI threshold. So instead of 15% at 65%, you say you're gonna give us 15% at 50%. So you're getting 15%, you're still getting the same set aside, but they have to provide you with more discount or serve lower income households, or just a larger cash contribution. Say, all right, if you want, if we're allowing a cash, or if we're allowing a payment in lieu, you have to kick that number up to be able to be due off site. And so once again, this is oftentimes around communities that want to see diversity integrated in individual projects rather than sending areas and receiving areas. And because you oftentimes, I can give you, like, for example, where I live in Fairfax County, the southeastern part of the county tends to be a lower cost, land is cheaper down there, it's a lower income level than lots of other parts of the county. And so if this were allowed, I could easily see developers saying, all right, I'm gonna go build this project over here in Tyson's Corner where land or units are selling for $2 million a unit, and I'll go build you the income controlled units in the part of the community where they're only half $500,000 a unit. Because then I'll be able to get closer, and I might even make some money off of that, as opposed to, you know, having to do it in Tyson's. But Tyson's is better served access to jobs, better served access to retail, better served access to transportation and everything else. And so that, which is the reason why it's more expensive. Yes.
Councilor Baker.
Just clarifying, and again, I don't want you to get through this, but one of the tensions we've seen in there was a project in Ward 8 that wanted to satisfy part of its requirements in Ward 7, and it's not just because of the ward, it was a different kind of project, and the council was very resistant to having it off-sited. And so I think one of the questions we would want to wrestle with you is there's no sort of geographic, as you say, that they could be very different parts of the city, and the part of we've been trying to not have a sense that there's one part of the city that's where these subsidized units are going to be held, and the rest of the city is sort of off limits. So I think, as I see the recommendation, it doesn't have a geographic dimension to it at the moment. You mentioned one could be included, but there's not yet here in your recommendation.
Correct.
So would you consider one, or?
Absolutely, and so I would say, located within, so I, and forgive me, but I know you have like the VCOD area. So if you're doing a project, I say it has to be somewhere else in the VCOD area. So that would be like an off, it can be off-site, but it still has to be within the area, because the VCOD areas provide tremendous transportation accessibility. And so to take it out of there and put it somewhere else that doesn't have that would be disadvantageous for the tenants or the owners of those units.
Right.
And so that would be one where you would have to meet within that. You could, I can't say as I am well versed right at this table at this moment to say if it's in Ward 7 or if it's in Ward 8, it can't be in Ward 7. But oftentimes you solve that with a proximity.
Well,
right, you say it has to be within a half mile, or it has to be within a quarter mile, or something like that.
That's not currently part of your recommendation.
No, it's not.
And I'm just highlighting that I think that it might be useful to consider that.
Well, when we get to the conversation part, maybe if you all had some ideas for us that we would like to. No, but I'm happy to have that conversation. I just would like to, if this group has thoughts on that, I would like to kind of hash those out and see where maybe your collective thought would be, so that it help guide where we go.
And on that same vein, Councilor Kalis.
I can wait.
Okay, fantastic. I've got your name down if you wanna, there you go.
Add me to that one, because I have some.
Certainly, great.
Next, please. The design and construction section, there was a question about that portion of the document, which the area that we were asked to focus in on is the size of units. So the relative size of units of deed restricted units compared to market rate units. And really, there's a lot of redundancy in the current language. It starts with the inclusionary units have to be of a similar size to the market rate units. Then it says then they have to meet DHCDs in their comprehensive plan. And then it says they have to be the same size or they have to be at least 80% of the market rate units. And so just within, they have to be similar size and they have to be at least 80%. So there's a lot of redundancy in there. Our recommendation is, let's move away from say the language recommendation we have is the inclusionary units have to be the same size or larger than the average of the market rate units with the same bedroom count in the project.
You say the same size or
Larger than the average of the market rate units with the same bedroom count. So if I have 10 market rate 1-bedrooms that range from 700 to 800 with an average of 750, then the inclusionary units have to be at least 750 square feet. They can be larger, but they have to be at least 750 square feet. So rather than mess with all this language that really all kind of says the same thing, is let's just get to say this is what our expectations are. Because also there's one in there that talks about at least 10% of the building square footage. Well, if they have to be the same size and the requirement is 15%, then it's going to be at least 15%. So you don't need that anymore. So for us, that would be the recommendation, just to make it simpler and make it easier so that it's more consistent and predictable for your development community as well.
Should it be bedroom and bathroom count? Just bedroom.
So our recommendation would be just that it had the same square footage as market rate units with the same bedroom count.
Because sometimes we have one bath, sometimes we have.
Oh, I understand, and that could definitely be added, I mean, you could absolutely add that into the language. But our recommendation is just similar size bedroom, based on bedroom count, because if you're building a lot of 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom, 2 baths, that's gonna kick up the size. And you're either gonna make some really large rooms, or you're gonna put a second bathroom in there. Because they're gonna have to have the square footage anyway.
Okay.
So, and then that would be our recommendation on the design and construction piece. Next, please. Housing plan and covenant, do we need to adjust the requirements of the housing plan and covenants? Really, the only thing is, if you accept our recommendation to remove tier 2, you just need to change some of them to remove the language around tier 2. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot in this section that I think needs to be adjusted too tremendously. The one non-tier 2 recommendation we have is in subsection C. It talks about to get the site approval, you have to have the city's and DHCD's approval. And our recommendation is, you already know the policies, there's no real reason that you have to go outside of house to get DHCD to be also signer offer, so just have it the city's approval. And remove that additional step. It doesn't, we don't believe it provides any additional oversight that isn't done by your staff already. So that's the big one here. Next, please. Public funding limitations. Does the current public funding limitations need to be reviewed? So these are the things that came out of the public funding recommendations. The 2 big ones are those that are lower than maximum eligible income limit for all or some of the inclusionary units by at least 10 percentage points below that stipulated. It's really unclear. And once again, once you go to the average sizing policy, then this kind of becomes a redundant piece of it. And then we recommend that you add in a statement that basically exempts light tech projects from IZ. Because they're already gonna either be doing 20% at 50% of AMI or 40% at 60% of AMI. So let's just state in the thing that projects that meet that requirement are exempt from IZ, because they're already going to be exceeding what your IZ requirements are asking for. And so that gets back to the unusual net benefit. You're getting way more than you're asking for, even though they're getting some subsidy or frankly, some substantial subsidy to make those projects work. And so we just encourage you to include language that exempts them from the IC policy. Next, please. Elder housing with services, we kind of talked about this a little bit last time, but we did some additional math work on it. Someone had asked us to look at different size projects. Really, at the end of the day, just to reiterate what we talked about last time is, when you start talking about the inclusion of moderate to substantial healthcare services, the gap differential between 80% of AMI, 65, 50% of AMI, and what that price is per month to be able to serve that individual is insurmountable from a financial perspective. And those healthcare costs are always going to increase at a much more rapid pace than the increase in the AMI thresholds that are gonna be set through, you know, the FMR. So our recommendation is to, right now, the policy says 5% at 80% of AMI and a calculation for medical care numbers. To make it easier, to make the math work a lot better, because there's a lot of like assumptions of how many hours is that and how much does an hour cost. Is saying, let's bump it up to 10% and 80% of AMI, which will increase that percentage, but then remove the medical calculation component of it, which frankly will be different from project to project, from how much healthcare provision is being provided. And so let's get to something that is a bit more universal, a bit more predictable and consistent across the different projects, and then allow that by right to be a cash contribution. So rather than delivering beds, they can just say, okay, we owe you 7 beds. We're gonna calculate that and we're gonna make the cash payment for those 7 beds. And then that can go into the housing trust fund. If it is in the interviews that we did with the elderly care with services community, and the modeling that we did is, and you can see on the screen what happens even when you try and deliver the 5%, what the impact of those project is, and that's in current numbers. And as we all know, like I mentioned earlier, I'll repeat it because it's worth repetition, the cost of healthcare is always going to increase faster than the percentage increase in the AMI payment calculations that are coming out of HUD. And so it's a problem today, it's gonna be even more of a problem tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So let's allow this to be a cash in lieu payment into your trust fund, and then you can use those resources to try and either create elderly care housing with services in a project where it's then being done by an entity that has the wherewithal, the capabilities and access to other revenue streams that can help make that project financially feasible.
Come back to it.
Yeah.
On your question.
Unless there's, yeah,
I just wanna be sure I understand, so you're recommending a cash payment for this kind of,
Yes.
only for this kind of.
No, no, not, it is allowed by right, they don't have to ask for permission, they can do the units if they want to, but it offers an opportunity to make a payment that they don't have to get
Okay,
approval for.
okay.
So it becomes administrative. Yep, I think that's it, so if we wanna go back, I guess.
As long as
yeah, as long as we're here.
Okay.
That's what
I'll
it is.
just stop it.
Go back one, please.
So again, the appeal of this again is that you're trying to take and make things a lot simpler at the project side of the game. On the earlier, we talked about the break point at 7 and then doing away with that after 20, and here the set aside. The one question I have is that when you turn everything into a cash payment, it puts a big burden on the housing trust side to turn those payments back into either housing or services. Right, I mean, because what's coming out now in the development process is not an in-kind contribution, but a cash contribution in both of these arrangements. And it may make perfect sense for cleaning up the ordinance, but I guess the question I would have is how do we make sure that some of these services and opportunities are realized rather than they just go into the housing trust and the fund, never comes back, so to speak.
Well, the best way I would answer that question is there are like municipalities like Somerville and Cambridge are running very robust dynamic housing trusts that are investing in projects, and so they're able to take that cash flow that comes into them and become more of a direct partner in the development arena by providing gap financing or providing grants. And so that opens the door to do maybe some different things that you weren't able to do before. Will that require your existing trust to maybe become a little bit more sophisticated? Possibly. But I guess I would describe it as a good problem to have, is having the resources maybe to be able to do more or provide different levels of benefits to help, for example, projects that are applying for LIHTC 9% credits to be able to get funded, because there's caps on how many of those projects each year, and you get scored based on what you bring to the table compared to what you're asking for from the state. So I'm not saying I understand where you're coming from, is your trust is now going to potentially have more resources to be able to do more things, and they're gonna have to be able to execute on that, but I would argue, I think that's a good problem to have.
Right, and I understand that, and Councilor Albright is our representative on the housing trust, and so I think that I don't know if we get to the point of adopting all these recommendations, then there does seem to be a resolution or something to go to the housing trust to say, we're going to change the way the formulas run, and you may be getting some money now, maybe not, and if nobody builds anything, it's all a moot point, right? But at least to be aware that these are issues that are going to be covered by their activity rather than by the developer, right?
Can I speak to
Yeah,
that?
the only thing I wanna say before you go is, Councilor Lucas, I see you, right? I've got your name on my list, and you can take your hand down if you want, and I'll get to you like right after this particular topic is covered. Up to you, sir.
I think the housing trust would be thrilled to have more money coming its way. We have a very sophisticated housing trust, very active in their professional lives in developing affordable housing. They know how to do it. They just don't have any resources to do it. So they would be thrilled to move forward with more money coming their way. Is that it?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're our person.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, okay, I was gonna do the 4 to 20 units on page 5.
Can we
Yes.
wrap this one up first? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Councilor Guest.
So I'm a little confused here because I'm supportive of what Councilor Baker is suggesting, that you tie the elder services, the elder housing with the services, and any sort of appropriation stays tied to that project, so it's
That's what
supported.
I'm here.
With the actual support of medical care for those residents. So if in fact there is a payment, it should be associated with that project. I don't understand why it would go into paying for housing when in fact that need is there, for those residents. I'm a little, I would wanna keep them tied.
Can I introduce,
Yeah.
Yeah, just to be clear in terms of what's being suggested here. Right now, you can either provide the beds with services, or you can provide a cash in lieu payment. That's not gonna change, you still have that option to provide the beds. What's gonna change is that you're no longer required to provide the beds and services in your mathematical equation for the in lieu. So you either make the payment and you don't have to provide the affordable beds, or you have to provide the affordable beds and somehow provide the services.
and what I think I heard you saying,
Yeah.
Councilor Guest, was different, correct? Which is, in the case where those funds are coming in, as opposed to the services, the question on the table, I believe, is how would the trust then ensure that eventually those dollars go to fund services?
So you could have a bucket, for these projects that is elder housing with services. So you have a bucket that can only be used for projects that have elder housing with
Okay,
services, so that's.
So I'd like to be able to write that into the ordinance.
Into the affordable trust, like
Well,
to ensure that that is
somewhere.
carried through,
Correct.
right? Whether that's at the affordable trust and or the ICO.
Okay, so.
Is that right?
Well, I'm more specifically, because it sort of seems like it needs to be here,
Fair
but,
enough.
I just.
Well, that's why we have the eminently capable Mr. Lee with us to figure out the best place to put
Okay.
it,
Okay,
or place as, if that were the case. Counselor Wright?
So I see a problem with this. First of all, we don't have a lot of senior housing with services. So you're only gonna get a little bit here and there. And you're going to give it to the Affordable Trust, and for them to build something with that services, there's really not a lot of money there. I just worry that it's gonna get stuck and we're just not gonna get anything for it because it doesn't.
It'll never amount to a large enough.
Yeah.
figure, so. Yeah,
Yeah, so some of our best nonprofits are Two Life Communities, the Newton Housing Authority. Both of those can have the capability of building elderly housing with services. So those are the folks that probably can deliver best that kind of product.
Do they have space to, I know they've had projects before, do they have enough space to expand even more?
Well, maybe if they have a little more money, they can look beyond their current footprints.
Councilor.
So I'm hoping that the Affordable Housing Trust is gathering a ton of data about all kinds of housing. And one of the things that they've just been looking at is housing with supportive services and who pays for that. And it's a very complicated formula for who pays for it, and it's not really the housing side that pays for the services. So I really think it takes a little bit more thinking. It's not as easy as just saying, okay, well, we'll put some money into some affordable housing with services, because the services part is the hardest part to do. So I think that we just saying that we'll put it in a bucket for a group that's gonna do affordable housing with services may not be enough to actually create anything. So I'm hoping that Ann Houston will come and make a presentation to us with all the things that they're finding soon, even before we make a vote on this.
Because it does sound to me then that we should probably move on to the other
Yeah.
questions that people have,
Yeah.
because this clearly is not only gonna generate a lot of great conversation, but doesn't sound like the right people are all here.
Those are my concerns, yeah.
All right, so I saw hands popping up and down while we were going through the deck. The order in which I have them written down, Councilors Getz, Lucas, followed by Kalis.
Okay, I think you need to go to the pages because
Yes.
it's like.
Oh,
it
you
makes
want to
a
work
little-
it backwards?
Yes.
Let's just
Let's
talk
go
through,
backwards.
like, so in other words, and by the way, if other folks have questions on the same topic. That Councilor Getz is gonna bring us to, feel free to chime in at appropriate moments. And I will leave appropriate to you.
Oh, God, no, it's, I have lost my, we have to go back and I have to look at my notes because it's, I'm not catching.
Okay.
I know there was one that we were, the conversation is gonna have to keep going in the direction of like the slide deck, because I
All
don't
right,
remember.
why don't we try it this way?
Oh,
Counselor Lucas, if you would like to kind of swing us around to your topic, perhaps Counselor Getz will be inspired.
So I get to cut Raina?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, good. All right. Can you go to page 5, please, sir?
Yes.
So when we were discussing this last, I think we were across the hall. And this is something that I docketed, I think maybe a year and a half ago. It was to update the IZ ordinance to include developments that are 4 to 6 units. And again, when we met last time, I asked this question, and the answer that I got was, we're gonna present something at the next meeting being today. And all I see here in the second to last bullet point on this page is provide a fee in lieu for projects 4 to 20 units. Just wondering, what are you thinking about for projects that are 4 to 6 units?
It would be a fee in lieu only option, not to.
What do you, oh, go on, sorry.
It would be projects from 4 to 6 would be included in the IZ, and it would be a cash payment rather than the delivery of a unit.
Agreed. What do you,
So
oh,
just on that point, you always have the option, Kyle, of providing the unit. You can't just.
Correct.
The chances are that they'll take the partial payment in 4 units.
Yes.
Because it doesn't,
It would be a by right payment in lieu. But you could still provide the unit.
Correct.
but it would start
Yeah.
at units.
Yes, I was never considering that a unit be provided when it's 4 to 6. I was always in my mind that it should be a cash payment. I was hoping we would discuss some numbers at this meeting. So what are you thinking about for numbers?
We have an example, actually, if we go to the next.
So,
slide.
so for 4 to 6, right now it's 15% of the set aside. And so at a 4 unit, you would multiply that by 0.15. And that would determine the value calculated of what percentage you have to pay of the $650,000.
So
that-
a 6 unit,
So a four unit project would provide 60% of the established TDC number, which is $650,000. A 5 unit project would be 75%, a 6 unit project would be 90%. And so you would follow the current set aside requirements and use that as the math calculation to determine what that payment would be based on the decimal that is created by multiplying the number of units by 0.15.
so that's your baseline, just number of units times 0.15 times 650,000?
Yes.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds promising. Thank you. So I hope we can go forward with that. That was my only question for this evening. Thank you.
No, we're here, we're just here to make sure that you're happy, sir.
Well, I am happy, okay? All right? You can hear it in my voice.
Counselor Wright.
Okay, so this is where.
Wait,
my-
what about me?
Do you have a question on this page?
Yeah, we were gonna stick to the page, is that all right? Are you on the page?
I mean, I'm, whatever, it's okay.
Counselor Kalis, we encourage you to come to the meeting and enjoy the.
Well, he said, you know, Raina, then
He did.
Lucas, then Kalis.
I lied. No, I'm sorry.
So I'm uncomfortable for a payment in lieu up to 20 units, because we have a lot of projects that are under 20 units, and we'd like to see the affordable units spread throughout the city. And, you know, right now, I think it's 7 to 9 is a cash, and then a 10 above has to be a unit or whatever.
Units and partial, right?
So I'm not comfortable with 20 having that option of just cash. I'd rather see units.
How many units from a 20?
3.
3?
Why is it, why did you go to 20? We said a bunch of towns have done it, but what's really the calculation that says 20 is the right number?
Well, there is no right number. It is a strategy of, like I said, we heard through interviews that projects that get below that, it's more challenging when you're providing fewer units for the management and the operation of them. And so it was a way to try and find a solution that provided, 1, more revenue for the trust, 2, helped out the development of those projects for long-term implementation, and to not try and go beyond where the market has shown that that is a viable solution.
Okay, so most of these projects are condos. So
Yep.
once they sell them and you sell the affordable one, doesn't the developer walk away and it's not their problem anymore?
Yes.
So I think 20 is not the right number for us, because ours are normally not rentals, but are condos.
Yeah, we see a lot in the 10 to 16-ish range, I think. Like that just feels like a sweet spot.
Could we just get some data on that?
Yeah, I
for the
think,
future?
yes, that's ultimately where I think
Yeah.
this.
Like
goes.
the last year or two, the projects, you know, are they condos or are they rentals? And I can only think of one that's a rental lately, you know, that's in that range, but generally, you know, what I've noticed, and this is just, I do pay attention, I don't have the data down, but 30, 35 is usually the cutoff point where they're going to either go to rentals versus condos. Below that is condo. And again, you know, there's exceptions to the rule, but overall, these will be mostly condos.
We'll look at that information when we come back the next time, where we're gonna tie all of this stuff together, because I know we kind of talked about it in one tranche and another tranche, and they all do really need to be kind of organized singularly so you can understand how they all interrelate to each other, because there is connectivity between even the recommendations that we talked about the last time in these.
So-
But, yeah, we can take a look.
Okay, and I have a quick question. So the TBC is from the summer of July of 2022 for 650. So I'm expecting this summer that number might be higher than.
Not necessarily,
Well, we have to revisit it this summer.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
it's
a trust.
become more difficult for on the, which Kyle can speak to in terms of the unpredictability of lumber and inflation and recession and all the things. Don't really know, but we'll take a look.
And that number was right during COVID too, wasn't it? And the building prices were really high.
That's
then.
correct. Yeah.
And some of it has come down.
Well, so if you go to that, I think you go back one, please. You can see these are the numbers that we came up with, what the current market is based on existing projects that we took a look at and through our analysis, and so that 650 number is higher. Once again, the market is normalized to it, which is why we're saying don't change it. Our recommendation is in July, don't change the 650 and let it ride for a while, and then you can always revisit it again. Because I do believe it has, to the point I believe you were making, it has gotten a little bit accelerated past where that market number would be if it was calculated some other way.
And I would imagine that TDC versus construction cost.
No, total development cost.
Like, or so, yeah, total development cost versus construction cost. There are other elements in either of those calculations that are significantly different.
No, I mean, so when I use the term construction costs, it's the total cost of everything, soft costs, land costs.
Sure.
The cost of like the electrification and the tree everything is in our numbers. It's a.
Sorry, but TDC, as you say, they're calculated off 3-year rolling average, but total units, right? So it's a much different calculation. A lot more goes into TDC than.
Well, I will say the biggest difference is projects that receive subsidies oftentimes are financed and built differently than projects that are going through the market. And so that's probably gonna be the number one difference is where they're emphasizing the dollars that are gonna be spent.
Got it. So now, if I may. I'm gonna go to Counselor Kalis.
Are we still on this one? Yes, I have some on there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Are your questions at least in part on this topic, sir?
They're all over the place.
I don't know how to deal with that. Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, I mean, on this one,
Go for
on this one, I guess my question is, 4 to 20 units would be a fee in lieu. Where you've seen this, something similar to this happen, do developers then lean towards just developing 3?
When the project is small, yes. So right now, you're probably seeing a number of 6-unit projects.
Yes.
That are looking to avoid getting to 7. A project that might be 5 or 4 may just lean down to 3. Yes, that's the unfortunate side of setting these floors is. Unless you go all the way down to 1.
Right.
There's an incentive to sometimes not deliver that next unit because there's a impact. The payment in lieu, by only paying a partial value and not having to deliver a whole unit, helps mitigate some of that impact. Because I'm only paying what I would have owed you rather than having to round up to the next unit. And so that's the reason why we're saying if you're gonna go down to 4, you need to tie that to allowing them to do a partial payment. Calculated based off of the ratio.
Yeah. So at that 15% type number based on the 650. Okay. And those numbers you think are right. I mean, I just don't want us to all of a sudden start getting smaller projects built.
Well, I mean, let's put it this way, projects that would be 7 or 8, maybe only doing 6 right now because it's more financially in their benefit. Projects that are gonna be 4 or 5 may now only do 3. So you're kind of just moving the goalpost a little bit, if that makes sense.
Could you leave it at 7 to 9 and then use the same, 0.15 times 650?
Well, you already do that for 7 and 9, I believe.
Right. That's what's in place now.
Oh, that's the payment in lieu. Okay, so you're using the same formula.
Yes.
Okay. All right, got it. All right, that's it on this page.
All right.
So I think going down to 4. We're seeing all these projects that are 6, they might build 7 now. Because they can't avoid it anyways. And they may have wanted to do 7 or 8 before, but they were just avoiding the IZ, but they're already in it. They may give us more units.
You might get projects that we're going to do 6 that will do 7 or 8, and you might get projects that we're gonna do 5 that will now only do 3.
Yeah.
Correct. Counselor Getz?
Okay, so this is we're on page 5. All right, I wanna, I was actually trying to look up the BCMD, because we had that sort of process where we could actually add an additional floor. But so now I'm sort of seeing an issue with because we wanted to incentivize market rate smaller units. But now the unit count is gonna get a lot higher, in terms of, those actual builds. There was one build that's potentially coming to nearby you in West Newton that was 32 units. So I'd love to know and understand the interplay between putting this in place and then the density of units on the lot size, the relationship of the lot size with the number of units that potentially could go on that site, for the BCOD. Do you understand what I'm?
Well, I don't know how, that has nothing to do, if they're doing 32 units, they're not gonna be impacted by this anyway.
No, I'm
Okay.
I'm
sorry, I'm locked on this
unclear
conversation.
Whether, I sort of see this as, we are now, capturing, more, we're going lower, so that then we're gonna, require units. But we're also dealing with, we always want the unit built. And, I think that's a higher priority, in terms of rather than getting the fee, just because I sort of see this as the potential of in place in our village centers getting inclusionary units, that's the principal goal. So I don't wanna, we also want smaller, footprint, smaller size units. So that's sort of playing
Sure.
with us, in between the two. So I just kind of need an appreciation and an understanding of, putting this in place and how that's gonna affect in the BCOD. This is where, this is where I'm really looking to her.
Yeah, I wanna make sure I understand. So in the BCOD, we just carry forward the current IZ ordinance with the exception of in BC2 and BC3, there's the bonus.
Yeah.
Where in BC2, if you provide 25% affordability, you get an extra story. In BC3, if you provide 50%, you get an extra story. I don't see how this changes any of that. Where this will affect the BCOD is you may see projects in MRT that otherwise wouldn't trigger the IZ now have to make at least a payment. So in the MRT, you're either building 4 to 6 units. So that right now is under our IZ threshold. So those would now trigger a payment if we went down to 4 units. Or where we do see it happen in the MRT is when you split a lot, you do 2 buildings next to each other because we add those together. So I don't see any of this significantly affecting the BCOD.
Yeah, see, this is where, this is a little difficult for me because I would prefer the unit rather than the fee.
Well, right now we don't get the unit typically for MRT. And where we get the unit in the BC2 and BC3, I mean, you could see some smaller projects that would have an option to pay, but it wouldn't impact that bonus at all. So you wouldn't be able to pay
No, I
the
was
fee
I was remembering that.
and get more
Yeah.
units.
Yeah.
But it would be the same as, a 4 to 20 unit project anywhere else in the city.
Right, okay, but the application is what I'm looking at, the density and what could potentially go on a lot, and how that would play out in the IZ. And I sort of would much rather see the units built rather than the fee. It just sort of seems like that's our goal. We wanna have as many inclusionary units in the village centers, and we wanna have them spread out throughout the city. Yeah. So, and then the other piece here was the construction cost difference, the 400 versus the 550.
The cost to build concrete and steel is more expensive than wood.
Okay. All right, but then should they then, pay at a different rate? Because it sort of feels like,
Well, they're already paying more either way. Because they're paying $650 and it's somewhere between 400 and 550, so they're already. You already are incenting them to do the units on site. So the current policy already says if you owe a whole unit. You may prefer to deliver the unit because it's actually financially better for you than paying the fee.
Right.
At $650,000.
So
Sorry, Councilor Kalis?
Yeah, I just want to say too, because Counselor Getz was talking about this. Look, I want the units as well, but I'm really excited about the cash too. I think that what RKG was saying, and based on their experience in other towns and cities, the more housing cash that we have, the more we can do as a city, and I think that's really important, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I know we're kind of all kind of inclined to want to get the units, but I feel like this infusion of potential cash could help us a lot, and I feel like they need to hear that. So that's how I feel about that.
Just real quickly, Council Albright knows about this, because the Housing Trust had sufficient resources. They were able to preserve 112 units all at once at Newton Gardens on North Street. Had they not had those resources, that project could have gone to market rate stuff and you never would have had all that affordability. So I think the theory is that the trust could use that money to leverage more affordable housing and perhaps deeper subsidy than you get at units across the city where you have one unit here, one unit there. And speaking for staff, that's really complicated for us to have a couple units in one location and a couple in another, to be able to monitor them, and the administrative work that goes into that for the developer is really complicated as well. As someone said earlier, they're generally unsophisticated. So that they don't normally do this. So their ability to carry out the lottery and then provide us with the information that we need on a yearly basis is difficult.
Do the marketing at the correct time.
Yeah.
Right.
So we do see this on the smaller projects. We just had one in Newton Center, where there's one unit. And I think they're being charged like $25,000 to conduct the lottery, which is an outrageous sum for one unit, but it also means we're gonna have to follow that unit for the rest of its life in this building that otherwise has no affordability.
Is that a rental or?
Did Councilor Kalis, did you
That's,
hear
I
all
believe,
that
rental.
or enough of it?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, great. Councilor Wright, and then I want to go to Councilor Maliki, who's got her hand up as well.
So the construction cost here, you said this includes land?
Mhm.
So you're saying in Newton, a wood frame is 400, because that's a number we don't use at all, I don't think, in Newton when talking to builders.
Well, so once again, this is based on averages of information we receive back. So there's gonna be others that are more, there are gonna be some that are less. This was based on information that was provided back to us, and then we ran our analysis based on construction cost per square foot, the average size of a unit, yada, yada, yada. So I'm not surprised that there's gonna be a range in there, but this kind of falls in the mid zone. And once again, I wanna be clear, these are not units that are receiving public subsidies. These are traditional for-profit IZ projects that are going on here in the city.
And so what does that 400,000, how much is that per square foot roughly? What does 1,000 square foot unit?
No, less than that. I don't know what the exact average square footage is, but it's much less than 1,000 square feet.
Thank you.
We can get you that number, it's in the
Yeah,
model, I
that's-
just don't know it off the top of my head.
Great, I'm gonna go to Councilor Maliki just because we haven't heard from her yet. And then I've got Councilors Baker and Albright.
Thank you. So I jumped into this meeting from finance just in time to see this slide. And I couldn't disagree more about the enlarging the scope of projects that we would allow to pay in lieu of providing units. If we had filibusters, I'd be pulling a Cory Booker on this. I just think it's not.
Thank God for that.
Not a good idea. I guess both mathematically and philosophically. I mean, I think we've had the IZ ordinance for what, 20 years? We just had the financial feasibility of it vetted by the state in the context of the NBTA communities. And it's getting us inclusionary units that are truly inclusionary, included in with everybody else. The mathematics of this, we're basing the unit cost on 3 years past, so it's a retrospective cost number. You know, on average, costs are going to go up over time. So we're taking an average cost based on the past and handing that over to presumably the Affordable Housing Trust to spend in the future. It's uncertain how many great projects like the Newton Gardens one we're going to have, except, you know, that's kind of a remarkable exception. Generally, it's hard to tell how we're going to get an affordable unit for this amount of money as a payment in lieu. To me, if the surest way to get a unit is to get a unit, and there's no ambiguity about it. There's no uncertainty about the sufficiency of the funds in the future. And, you know, to me, it's bad enough that we have payments in lieu for the 7 to 9 range. I would not want to extend it any further. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I believe I just said Councilor Baker and then Councilor.
So let me go back to, I think, the origin of all of this. The origin is that you give an opportunity for more density than you would otherwise have because you get an affordable unit. I mean, that's part of the rationale for inclusionary zoning, as I understand it, right? We're giving something in return for getting something. The thing that, while I understand the financial logic that you all have taken us through, it begins to look like we're basically charging for development. And having people pay for a premium for doing something, and then the funds go into a pot that we hope is going to be used, and we have great representation on the agency that is going to do that. But it somehow begins to become an economic as opposed to a housing oriented incentive. And that part, I fully understand what you've argued, that the administrative cost of the single unit, that the decision making by people not to go to 7 units because they can stay at 6 and not have to provide the unit and do the cash. We're seeing it anyway. But I am somewhat troubled in the sense that it begins to look like we're just collecting fees out of developers, which we hope will translate into actual units. Now, the planning director's indicated one process where we've been able to capture that and do some things, but it doesn't have the kind of assurance that it's going to be scattered over the city. So, you know, I think these are improvements in the ordinance because you've isolated the kind of breakpoints in the incentive, but the overall flavor of it feels funny to me. It doesn't have the same, you know, where we started from has become somehow more looked at in the sense of the administrative and financial convenience and not assuring that the units are actually going to be built. That's the problem that because we're hoping that by doing all of this, we will have more money and the money will be properly used and turned into units. And that is the link that is not assured. So that's the part of this that gives me some pause. I mean, I've gone with you all along and I've sort of nodded my head every time you said something because it made rational sense to me. But the net effect of this is not to assure that the unit is built. It's that to hope that the unit is going to be built because of these economies of scale and administrative savings, right? And that part, I would like to see something a little more powerful in terms of the linkage at the back end if we're going to make these adjustments at the front. So I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's going to be important to sell this to our colleagues as really a housing rather than a funding system.
Councilor Albright, followed by Councilor Kalis.
So on this particular point, I think we need to talk to developers and I mean. I totally understand Counselor Getz and Counselor Malaki's comments about we want the units. You know, that's a philosophy that we need more units, and I agree with that, we need more units. But it may be the best way to do it is to find the money that can leverage other money to get more units. Because one unit here, one unit there, one unit, 2 units there, may not be the best administrative way to manage these units. And if the trust had money to leverage other money, you could end up with more units than you would get by one here, and one here. Because you can, you know, it's an economy of scale, and you can get a larger project or a medium-sized project. You know, this Newton Gardens project wouldn't have happened without the $3.5–4 million that the Affordable Housing Trust leverage to get money out of the state and out of the feds. And they would love to have more money to do that with. And there are plenty of developers who would be happy to come here and work with us. But they, you know, a little bit of an incentive of money would make a huge difference. So while we all sit here and say, we want those units, we don't want the money, we want the units. It just might be more efficient and more what the developers want to do if we do it the other way. I just want us to think about it as developers, not as city councilors sitting at a table who don't do development at all, that's all.
When we talk to developers, we're not city councilors having to make a decision.
I know, but we need to think about what's gonna produce what we really want, which is more units, as opposed to what we philosophically want to do. That's all I'm trying to point out. And I have a question about the 650,000. So are you recommending that we stay with 650 regardless of what the costs are or how it might change?
Based on looking at this data, if in July you increase it up to another number, I believe you're creating more of a financial challenge than already is in place compared based on the numbers that we're finding of what the market cost to develop and what the value gap difference is between market and income control are. So I would say yes. Our recommendation is to leave it at 650 for another 3 years and then reassess and see if the market changes that rather than.
So
continue
even
to-
if it goes, even if the real costs are higher, like maybe $800,000, you would still leave it at 650 because you may not be able to create that many units if you're undervaluing this.
Well, let me put it to a different way. If the staff does the math and those 3 years of subsidized projects turn out to be $800,000 a unit, and you put that in place, it is highly unlikely that, given an option, the development community will choose the cash payment over the unit because you're making the gap between what they're actually getting out of it by providing you a check
Okay.
as opposed to building the unit. And so, you know, there are communities that we worked in that purposely set the number artificially high because they do want to disincentivize cash payments. They do want to say, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna pay through the nose. And that's a strategy that communities use. They set a number that is not based in factual information. I would argue that there's a fundamental difference between development being done with subsidy money, federal or state subsidy money, and a development that's being done with a for-profit motivation. And which is the reason why I think we're seeing differences in the numbers. So if the numbers do turn out to be $100,000, yes, I would recommend you to leave it at 650 because that if you don't do that and your number becomes 800 and then you drop your set aside from 7 to 4, you may see 6 unit projects become 3 unit projects.
Okay.
Because you're now creating even more of a financial disincentive between what they're actually getting and what they're going to have to impact. So I'm trying to find ways. Our approach always has been revenue neutral. How do we find a way to get new opportunities without creating such a financial disturbance that it may actually affect the delivery of product? And so that's where we're coming from. So from the math side, and it's easy for me to say, I know it because I'm looking at it purely from a single perspective, which is the math side. Yes, I would leave it at 650. Regardless of what the numbers say, only because I'm concerned that if you, for example, if you choose to go to 4 units instead of 7 and you make it 8, even with a cash payment, you may see more projects pushed down than you would have thought to 3.
So you're saying that the pro formas for these projects don't produce enough cash to make the developers wanna do the $800,000 payment?
Yeah, what they get out of the benefit of the cash payment is not worth what they have to pay you to get.
Okay.
So we always go for the revenue, our approach always like, let's make it so that it works either way. So when we talked about getting rid of the 80 to 110. We didn't just take that percentage set aside and move it down, because that would have a financial impact. We looked at what the percentage set aside change should be to make it financially neutral. So instead of being 20%, where 15 is 65 and 15 is, or 5 is 110, I believe our number is 18.5 at 65. Because that 1.5% set aside that we are pulling back from is the financial equivalent of having to go from a 110 unit down to a 65 unit. So that's always the approach that we take when we make recommendations. We're trying to mitigate creating disincentives to develop in the marketplace, because in our experience, communities that go too far from the standpoint of ask from a financial perspective receive an unintended consequence of affecting the volume of development, which also has an impact on price affordability. It's just simple economics. If you squeeze supply, then you're gonna see price escalation because the demand is gonna outpace it.
Do you know what other communities are using for that price?
Some use value gap calculations, some use construction cost calculations, it's all over the board. I can't say as I know of one that's 650.
And we, probably good for.
Yeah, if you have any data.
We can pull some information and share with you what those numbers are.
Thank you.
Just a process question, though, if I can. We've talked around about this, but I guess the question is, are we in a position to give you a decision tonight of some sort, or is this a?
No, we wanna coalesce all of it together after these conversations and come back with kind of a master document that kind of starts looking at what the changes are. No, we're not.
We're not, okay.
No, we have another meeting where you kind of see it all put together as a puzzle.
And at the end, I have a comment sort of about to respond to that input.
Understood. Councilor Kalis.
Yeah, so I do feel, again, I'm kind of repeating myself. I feel strongly that cash is a good option here for us. I think it's administratively it's easier and so when Councilor Albright said, well, we need to think about this from a city council, but also from developers, administratively it's easier, from building perspective it's easier. It's just it's just all around, I think we would benefit. But I think for a lot of people who aren't uncomfortable with it, RKG, we need examples to illustrate that. I don't know if it's different communities and what their strategies have been, and then what they've been able to develop from a affordability standpoint in terms of number of units, but something that, because you already alluded to what Cambridge and Somerville do, and that they have these cash payments, and they have a housing trust that is quite adept at investing in different buildings because of the units that they're looking at. Something that gives us more meat on the bone to be able to point to and say, yes, this strategy works for other communities. We want to pursue it that way, versus, what I'm hearing is a little rigidity of, we want the units, but that might not give us as many units as we could get if we're actually open to this cash payment idea.
Interesting. If you may indulge, Councilor Baker, just because we have some special guest stars here in the room, and we also have RKG in the room. Question.
Yeah, I just want to know, when will there be an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what's being discussed?
So my understanding of how we're gonna go about this is RKG is absorbing all the questions, the comments, the concerns in many cases. They'll take that away. They'll be coming back to us with perhaps revised recommendations that address some of the questions, perhaps some different scenarios. I know that the planning department is going to be involved in some of those exercises as well. Because I've got extensive kind of questions, comments around the, well, what are the right cutoffs in terms of the unit counts, and you know, if we leave the TDC the way it is, and what if we bump it up? And that's another way to incentivize, you know, more units and less cash, or I hope I got that right, anyway. So once that process comes to fruition, right? I don't know if we will then proceed to, well, we will then come up with language to revise the ordinance. Then we will have a public hearing where the public will be allowed to comment or invited to comment before final deliberation and decisions are made on the ordinance changes.
But I respectfully suggest that you provide an opportunity for the public I've had a conversation with the RKG, but I have something to say that is totally, it's different if it's a different focus. And because I think, as I always say, what's being lost here is everybody talks about units. People are going to live in those units. What do the people of this community need? And I don't think that is reflected in the conversation that's going on here.
So in that particular case, all comments are always welcomed, right? All public comment, public commentary, if you will, please do send it. I can speak for everyone at this table. We read the incoming emails. So there's a difference between adding comments and a public comment, right? Which is kind of an official noticed process that we have to go through. So there are both opportunities available to you. Does that make sense?
I think we communicate with the planning department as well, of course. I have a question.
I guess I would say, where does the opportunity come for the public to hear the comments that I or other people might want to make?
Sorry, that is a fair question, and I believe that what we need to do is get those comments into this committee, into the planning department, right? And then once those comments are with us, we can start to have that conversation not only here at the table, because we are being televised, right? But as far as I'm concerned, I want to make sure your voice is heard by as many folks as we can. As early, perhaps, in the process as appropriate.
Thank you.
Councilor Baker.
So just to respond a little bit, I think that the public comment period is part of the public hearing. We don't have generally a separate comment. And so I can't promise you that that would be something that the committee would necessarily entertain. But I think that you, given your expertise and experience, and certainly would expect the planning department and consultants to be aware of the concerns you raised. I hope you will pass those along. I do have a question just in terms of where we're going in terms of Mr. Lee and the law department. Ultimately, the value of the exclusionary zoning had been justified on the grounds that it was providing units, and there was a marginal adjustment when the process of providing units wasn't feasible because the unit project wasn't big enough and there was sort of money to be paid. The transition we're moving towards is money rather than units, which is part of the conversation we've had. And the administrative side, as Councilor Albright indicated, and you've indicated, makes sense. On the other hand, the basic idea is that we normally cannot charge people something that looks like a tax. We can do administrative fees are generally in return for service, the cost of regulation, but this is kind of an unusual arrangement. And I guess I want to just make sure that if we move in the direction that you've indicated, which is more of a financial payment up to a larger size threshold project, which is what I hear, we're not running into a legal problem that we hadn't anticipated, because it really does begin to look like a payment in return for development opportunity, as opposed to a provision in kind. And that's a different flavor to me, and maybe a different flavor legally as well as a matter of policy. So I don't know if Mr. Lee is still with us, but.
He is, and he's got his hand up. Mr. Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make clear, the recommendations that were presented to you tonight and previously, those have not been reviewed by the law department. Now that it sounds like there's going to be a more concrete recommendation from the planning department with RKG's assistance, we will be reviewing it and making sure that whatever is being proposed is legally permissible. To Councilor Baker's point, at first glance, there's not too much concern. It seems really to be more a question of magnitude as opposed to, something new that we're doing. I understand that the thresholds are different, but with that said, I'm going to reserve final determination from the law department to be coming with the further recommendations from planning and RKG. We will be taking a look at it.
I would encourage you to just stay current with them earlier rather than later. It'd be a shame to go all the way through a process and then find that there's a problem at the legal end that we hadn't anticipated. So I appreciate the early consideration. That's fine.
Great, thank you, sir. Any other hands, comments, questions, concerns? Fantastic. Are you guys, do we have enough? Do we have enough captured in terms of what the takeaways are and what will be coming back, what you will be coming back with?
Well, so the primary thing we're gonna come back with, one is digesting all this information and making some modifications to what's in here. Making sure that we have the information you need to understand the cost benefit. I wish I could tell you there are solutions that meet everybody's needs, but the reality is no matter what you choose, there's always gonna be something that is left off the table in exchange for that. And so that's your point earlier, Councilor. The decision is up to the council, is which do we value more? The bird in the hand or two in the bush kind of concept, okay? And listen, this particular conversation is one that I have with just about every client that has an IZ policy or is considering an IZ policy. Do we allow, where is the payment option versus on-site or in the project? Do we even allow off-site or not? I mean, these are all things because there are benefits and drawbacks of both, and we recognize and appreciate that as well. Like I said, I get the benefit of looking at it very myopically through a single lens and provide you hit based on this approach. This is what we would recommend you to do, but we recognize and understand that there are other perspectives that you all need to take into consideration as you make these decisions. That being said, we want to weave it all together into a single comprehensive piece so that you can understand how all the different parts fit with each other. Because, for example, I go back to going down to 4. But then saying you have to do the roundup approach that we have right now, which technically a 4-unit project at 0.6 would then have to deliver a full unit. More financially impactful than a payment of 60% of a unit. And so those two go together in our minds. It's like, if you're gonna do that, then you need to consider this. If not, then there may be some challenges there or unexpected consequences. So all this kind of fits together. We want to give you that full tapestry so that you can understand it, and then we can talk about it in more concrete detail then.
Councilor Baker?
I think there are two different flavors of things you're talking about. One is kind of the efficiency question, which is, why are you doing this so that you get the results you want at like tax brackets, at a certain point, you try and keep your income below a certain point, or you make your contributions, or you're trying to smooth out the curve, as I hear it, right? That makes sense to me. I think the question that's sort of a more, maybe it's philosophic, maybe it's not, but is the nexus between the money that is raised and the production of the housing, and what does that look like, both in terms of geographic and quality of housing, kind of quality of housing, to pick up just by inference what Ms. McNeil was talking about. Who lives in this, and then what kind of units are we going to end up with? Because they're going to be disassociated from the source at some point, and now being done by some other agency elsewhere in the city. And the question is, how do we know that there's going to be the requisite nexus between the money and the opportunity? And if it's on site and in the building, we know what it is, but it comes with those costs which you've outlined for us. And so the challenge is to figure out, how do we assure the nexus that's going to make everybody feel that the change is going to be worth it. That's so. That's just where I am.
Well, I actually saw Counselor Getz first.
Now, the only quick question that I was trying to pull out of the slide deck was the percentages. So are you suggesting that we stay at 15% for everything?
No, it's 15% up to 20. From 20 to 99, I believe, Jason, is it 17%?
Yeah.
And then over 100, it's 18. So it's, in the memos that we sent, there was a summary of the first set of slides.
Okay.
That the recommendation of the changes in that, which was just a formalization of what we talked about last time. But that's the exact reason why we need to get this all into a single
Right.
entity,
Okay.
so that you're understanding how it fits. So no, so. Under 20, yes, 15%, 60%, 65 hours AMI. The 20 to 100, which was
17%.
It was
but it was
17.5.
15 at 65 and 5 at 110. And we're saying now make it 17, and then above 100, it was like,
It's 20%.
but it was like, the blend was higher than 18 and a half.
Okay, but we were getting to 20% with our ownership. And then we were getting to 20% with our rentals. Over 100.
So then what I'm hearing is they're bringing that back as part of the,
Right.
I'm gonna
but
call it the
you're
full
dropping-
program.
Yeah.
But it's dropping.
It's a recommendation.
Okay.
Based on the financial impacts of getting rid of the 110% tier.
So, I don't understand, so it was 20% before with 110%. And now we're getting rid of the 110%, so we're gonna go
This
down
is
to
the current-
18.
the current IC.
Yes, because you're not getting rid of those units, you're just changing them from 110 to 65.
But now you're only doing 18% of the project instead of 20.
Correct, because that's the financial equivalent.
Okay.
So once again, it's all about financial neutral, so.
All revenue neutral.
Yes, the idea is to try and find a way to say, all right, the 110 tier is having challenges.
Yes.
And so if we just bring that back down to 65, what is the mathematical equivalent so that it doesn't harm the development from a financial perspective?
So what we have now, you agree with then is the right numbers, basically, if we got rid of the 110. Our percentage, our 15% or 17%,
Because you got rid of that, right?
yeah.
So what we put in that memo for tier one is our recommendation from a revenue neutral perspective.
But that's a different question, you're saying. Revenue neutral for what we're doing right now, but is that the right number?
Yes, the market has normalized to what your current policy is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You want a motion?
So the cost of land and all that stuff is, the projects under the current policy have adjusted to the impact of what your policy is, and so they're able to do projects.
Right. Counselor Albright.
I just wanted to add, you had that, for the projects that are offsite, you had 3 recommendations. I
Yes.
don't remember what they are anymore, but I don't think near transportation was one of them. And I wanted you to consider.
Oh,
that
as one of the
As one of the-
requirements for offsite?
Or,
Okay.
or one of the considerations.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, we didn't really get to talk much about that tonight in terms
I
of, is
know.
it half miles and quarter miles, it have to be in the same ward? So we can definitely make that sure that's on the agenda for the next time we're together. But considering that it has to be within proximate of a transportation hub.
We have one.
It can, so I would say that if I'm doing a project not near transportation, then I have to do my offsite near transportation, which is probably gonna have a higher cost because it's in a more desirable location, could be a challenge. Now, what I'd say is if you're near transportation, you need to stay near transportation, I think that's a good idea.
Well, as it happened in the example that we shared with you, the Ward 8, there was no transportation. And the Ward 7 was a half a mile from transportation.
Okay.
So,
But it wasn't, but that wasn't the outcome we wanted.
I know.
Because
Didn't take it.
I would not use transportation on proximity, for me would be a more important.
And these are all
Yeah.
very valid ways to try and slice that
But that's
tomato.
Alright, so my understanding here is we've got a fair distance yet to go here, but we are making significant progress. To that end, I would love to entertain a motion.
Move to hold.
Fantastic, there's the motion, great.
I'm sorry, Councilor Crenshaw there.
If you wouldn't mind, I need to see faces again. Or perhaps I can do it this way. All those in favor of the motion to hold, please say aye. Randall
Aye.
Ray. any no votes? Any nays? Any abstentions? We are 7-0 to hold.
And my apologies, Councilor Preston, I forgot his role, but he's just.
It was
So
in
am I.
the room. It was-
I want to say there was a very thoughtful presentation, and I appreciate a lot of effort and thought that went into that. The dilemmas that you presented to us are there because they're dilemmas,
Correct.
not because, you know.
The only other question I have, and that is, we're literally closing out 44-24, holding 44-24 and 45-24. Have we addressed 45-24 in its, to its completion either previously, or is that in front of us? Because the word training did not come up once tonight. Not that I want to start a whole new debate.
Yeah, that wasn't in their scope,
Okay, that's fine.
yeah.
So then maybe that's in front of us, yeah.
Although again, if it ends up being a cost to the developer to provide the training, that probably belongs in the scope, because that's an additional.
I guess I would recommend that we not discuss it tonight, and my motion would be in both of those, but if the department can put some, tell us whether this has any light to it or not, for the next conversation. Because if it doesn't, then we can NAN it, and if it does, then we ought to talk about it.
We can do that.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, gentlemen. Thank you for making the trip. Very appreciate it.
Coming in person, it's a significant advantage to have the conversation across the table rather than on a screen.
Absolutely. So you do make me wear pants, so.
Yes, that is a requirement of being in person, yes,
Well,
Thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely.
You will be on TV.
Yeah, all right.
All right, so the next item, thank you again. Is 28-25, request for addition of maximum residential facade build out ratio to chapter 30, our zoning ordinance. And attached to this item is are both 85-24 and 41-24. So those will all be taken up together. You folks like to join us at the table, or Barney, if you would prefer to.
No,
remain off camera.
get snacks up here.
Can I suggest a brief bio?
Yeah, are we comfortable with a brief bio break, folks?
Yes.
Why don't we take the better part of 5 minutes, and then we'll see you at 9:32.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Fantastic. I think we are back. We're audio and video. We're all set?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. So proceeding with item 2825. I'll just hand it off to our planning department. They will lead us through, I think there are some updates to the questions and comments that came about over the past 2.5, maybe 3 weeks. So I will turn it over to Ms. Kyra.
Correct, thank you. So this is meant to be a response to some of the questions and comments at the last hearing. I think counselors raised a number of very good questions, and so we've spent a little time looking into some of those items a little bit further and have a bit of an update and some options for somebody else. So first, just to sort of revisit how we got here. We started doing a tear down analysis. This particular proposal really is aimed at how new construction fits into the existing neighborhood and making sure that it is contextual to the neighborhood. This isn't going to stop tear downs. From our analysis, you really would need to take pretty drastic measures to stop tear downs, as they are typically a very small home on a large lot. And there's so much differential between what's there and what could be built, that it would have, significant impact on most of the city, 90% of the properties in Newton that, could have pretty significant effects on property values as well as city budget with rental property taxes. So we recommended starting with something like this that is about shaping new construction before digging into a much larger effort that requires far more significant analysis and outreach. Also recommend, with the number of changes that have been made over the past few years, taking a bit of time to evaluate the cumulative effects of all of these changes. And this was pretty consistent feedback as we spoke to builders. Changes to retaining walls, measuring height, electrification, all of that will impact new buildings and new construction. So we recommend adding something like this facade ratio and then seeing how it all settles out, how it all works together. So there was 4 main sort of questions or concerns that came out of the previous meeting. What is the right exemption, if any, for odd or narrow lots? What should or should not count towards the residential facade? What is the impact to existing homes that may be made non-conforming? And is this sort of unintentionally rotating, particularly 2-family buildings away from the street? So starting with the narrow lot, this was our initial analysis, was looking at what is the right build out percentage for those narrow lots, because our data analysis showed that those are really not the homes that are being torn down. There's such a small percentage of the full tear downs. However, did hear that they do create concerns as to proximity to neighbors, and that this is a place where counselors do hear concerns from neighbors. So we do want to address how those work. So initially we looked at, do you set a larger ratio for those narrow lots? and how that relates to the setbacks. We thought that exempting lots with frontages less than 60 feet wide made the most sense. You still get a little bit at, you know, a 60-foot frontage. You're still getting more than what the setbacks would be. As you go sort of smaller frontages or a larger facade ratio, it sort of cancels out with the setbacks. The setbacks end up being controlling. However, what we heard last time was that there wasn't necessarily comfort with just flat out exempting those narrow lots. Where we, as we've spent more time with this, have more concerns is those odd lots. So Newton is not a lot of nice, neat rectangular lots. We have a lot of very odd shaped lots that have little or no frontage. And once you start applying that ratio there, you're gonna end up with unintended consequences. So it's one thing to apply the ratio to a smaller rectangular lot, because at some point, they're just gonna be controlled by the setbacks, and you can still build essentially what you could have otherwise. When you apply it to something like 531 Hammond here, which has technically has a frontage of 12 feet, but then opens up to a much larger lot, almost a full acre, you would only be able to have a 7.2 foot wide house. And I don't think that's the intent. Similarly, at 1 William Court, you know, this is a very small lot, but it is a nicer, neat square, but technically that frontage is only 15 feet, that sort of angled bit that's on William Court. So then you have a 9-foot wide, which really just isn't realistic. A few other examples, and these are, you know, there's a number of these across the city. 917 Beach Street technically doesn't have frontage on a public way. The 66 Hood, I'm not quite sure what the frontage would be or where, because this sort of has two triangular points that are coming down to Hood Street and to Huntington Road. But however you choose to measure the frontage there, it's going to be quite small. And then another example where you have a smaller frontage with these sort of flag shaped lots that opens up to much wider, like at 49A and B Carlton Street. It technically has 20 feet of frontage, but obviously much wider space for a home behind. So we really do think it's critical that we figure out how to address these. Otherwise, we think there's pretty significant unintended consequences. So a few possibilities on the right here. You could reduce the exemption from the current proposal of 60 feet to a lower number. Once you go below 37.5 feet for a rectangular lot, the setbacks are controlling. You could allow a minimum facade length regardless of frontage. We'd want to spend a little more time with this, but you know, one starting example is at least a 25-foot wide building. You could exempt the entire facade if it meets a minimum distance from the front lot line. Planning board had also talked about having these go through them for site plan review. I think our recommendation is one of the first two proposals. So either reducing, just mostly for simplicity reasons, but this captures more of the possibilities. So if you reduce that exemption, even if you go down to 40 feet, that's sort of accounting for those that have very, very small frontage, right? So those examples I showed, I go back, like Hammond Street, where there's 12 feet of frontage, that would be exempt. And we're not really, this isn't the issue we're trying to solve, is those where it's set further back with a small amount of frontage anyway. Same with William Court, that one would be exempt, and likely these as well, and they would just be controlled by setbacks. When you have a rectangular lot, once you hit, as you go down from the 60 feet to the 40 feet, you know, you ultimately get to just the setbacks are controlling it. And then below that, on a rectangular lot, it's fine. You're not losing anything by not having the facade ratio because setback is far more controlling. I think the other simple proposal would be just to always allow a minimum facade line, regardless of what the market was. So you know you always have at least like 25 feet. The distance back from the front lot line. That doesn't, I think, solve all of our issues. It solves the flag lot, but it doesn't solve like Beach Street on the left here, where there just isn't any frontage, but you also are not 50 feet, don't have 50 feet to work with to set back from the property line. Similar with William Court. So we think the best options are one of the first two.
Certainly, Counselor Baker, followed by Counselor Wright.
One of the questions I'd ask, and I don't know if this is reflected inherently in the second part, is that, and it may be a function of what you count in the, later on, you're gonna talk about how you count the frontage. But if, I think that the problem is not so much the frontage on the street, it's the frontage at the point at which the building is built inside the setbacks. So is it possible to have the measurement occur at the point where you're doing the building, whatever counts as frontage, you say, all right, that's not the frontage on the street, but the effective frontage that you're counting towards the building itself. That you go to the setbacks at that point and then say, all right, we'll use that moment or that place as the point of measurement, rather than try and rely on because the Hammond Street example obviously is a tiny frontage, but the potential scale of the building could be quite significant. It doesn't in this particular case, it's already built, but if somebody were to tear it down and build it with setbacks, it would be a quite substantial structure, even though it has a very tiny frontage.
Yeah, we looked at options of measuring somewhere else on the lot, and those got really complicated in figuring out where that is, because you're gonna be measuring at a different point on, some of these, and some of these, it's not clear, like, if you take Hood Street, how you're measuring that one, where, you don't have a sort of rectangular shape to work with, that it's just set further back. Because we looked at, do you take, at the front setback, or do you take sort of the midpoint of the lot? But there's so many, as we started to really look through the city, there's so many sort of strangely shaped lots. Like, if you look at what's happening around Hammond Street, there's all sorts of bizarre lot shapes happening.
That's a kind of an historic, literally a historic anomaly, because it's but I guess the question is that if you have a minimum, right, that you're going to, which is a minimum facade length regardless of frontage. I guess the question is, is that an alternative? In other words, you say you get a choice, or is it what's the?
It would be something like, you can't exceed 60%. However, you must always have at least a 25-foot minimum. So if 60% gets you 20 feet, then you get 25. If 60% gets you, 30 feet, you get 30 feet. But that sort of floor is 25 feet, so you're not creating really narrow.
Just a reasonable.
Yeah, kind of a reasonable size. If the setbacks leave you with 20 feet, you get 20 feet. This doesn't supersede the setbacks, but it gives you sort of that minimum floor. We have a similar thing already in the zoning, where if your setbacks leave you with less than, I think it's 800 square foot footprint, or 20 feet, then you get the 800 square foot footprint or 20 feet. So this would be similar to that.
So So what happens to the 60% proposal? Does that just disappear?
No, this is still, this is part of the 60% proposal.
Okay.
So this is sort of an exemption as part of that. So it would be applying the 60%. So if you went with option 2. It would be applying the 60% across the board. However, it cannot result in a facade length of less than 25 feet.
All right, that has some appeal to me, because I think it's administratively easier to follow, and explain both on the inspectional services side and also to the property owner when they get to the. But that's just a preliminary thought. I'd like to see where my colleagues.
Councilor Wright.
So start with, I agree, and I think I brought it up last time with Councilor Baker, is the odd shaped lots. I'd like to see that 60% of where they put the house, you know, and if it's really weird, they get a little bit more leeway, but a lot of times it's, you know, that dog bone type thing or whatever.
Pork chop, yeah.
Yeah, that they would need to look at that. The other thing is, what I'd like to see maybe is below 50 feet. Which I don't think there is that many lots. I mean, most of our lots, I think, are at 50 feet or more. So 50 feet or more would be the 60%, and below 50 feet, they would just do the setbacks. 'Cause I don't think there's a lot of really
Yes.
skinny lots.
So that's option 1. And that's just setting the exemption at 50 feet instead of 60 feet. Which is also a clean.
Cause at 50 feet, so at 50 feet, it's 60%. So that gives you a house width of 30 feet, you know, so what they're proposing being a minimum of 25, there isn't that much different, and then you're using your setbacks anyways. To put it, so they, you know, if they were at 49, they would actually get a little bit more than 5 feet type of thing.
Yeah.
But those are really narrow lots. I had a question, just kind of a zoning question. So a bunch of these are non-conforming of what like SR2 or SR3 is and stuff. So if you had a SR3 lot, and I think the minimum for an old lot standard is 7,000 square feet, but the lot is 5,000 square feet, if they tear down the house, they can build to the full, you know, FAR and setbacks and everything.
I believe so. I need to confirm with our zoning official.
Okay. That's
Do
it for right
you
now.
all have a favorite between these two? I'm sorry.
I mean, I think setting the exemption at 50 is a little easier or more straightforward. I think the 25-foot minimum width, we want to do a little more research and analysis to make sure that that is a reasonable sort of facade for, or, you know, length for a home. But I think either of the first two are straightforward enough to implement. We just don't want to create something that's overly complicated and has a lot of additional for implementation, because these are going to be by right, which means they're going to the calendar. The inspectors need to be able to give information quickly and verify, you know, when permits.
And mine would be 50 and above would be there, because you get a lot of lots at 50 versus above 50. 50 above.
Councilor Gibbs.
Okay, so, you know, when I look at these odd shaped lots, I always, it's like a cookie cutter. I wanna like put a zoning lot on top of it, you know, and I wanna make a rectangle out of that space. And I wanna capture as much of the lot area as I can. And I would love to see, and the first question is just actually how many of these, and we probably do have quite a few odd shaped lots.
We do.
You know, and so I'm sort of, you know, thinking, can we even, and this may be too much work, you know, just in terms of creating the biggest and the best rectangle that captures as much of the lot area as you can, and then that would then define whatever the frontage was. You know, so that you literally take a cookie cutter and you go on top of this, and then you just make a rectangle that captures as much of the lot area of that lot, and that would be called the zoning lot. So that then it would put in place, you know, that you would then
that calculator, you would then figure out, okay, the lot width or this is the number that you would use. And then the other thought that I had was, are we tied to the frontage? Could it not be the rear lot measurement, whatever one seemed to best capture the width of that lot?
Yeah, there's no. There isn't one that best captures it, and so if you go further west, you'll find, cities, newer cities have your, much further west across the country, new cities have your nice rectangular lots, and zoning is a little more straightforward. Newton does not. So much of Newton developed before we had zoning, and we have a lot of, we have to accept that we need to work within that. And I don't think we can force a sort of neat pattern on a city that has a lot more character than that. It wasn't neat, that, property lines were not neatly drawn up in many cases. So I think we need to, and again, we need to find something that can be easily implemented, because we're talking about 90% of the city. We're talking about a lot of parcels that this will affect. And I don't think we wanna unintentionally, dramatically impact property values of someone just because their lot is a funny shape. And not a nice neat rectangle, and we also don't wanna drive ISD crazy trying to implement this. The garage ordinance, I think we pushed it about as far as we could with the sort of geometry that goes along with that and angles of things and the need for protractors. I think we need to keep something that's fairly simple.
But then at this stage of the game, they're gonna be exempted, like if your lot is so odd.
Well, but we have to define what so odd is the issue, right? Yeah, and that's not something. And it seems, it seems obvious when you see it, but you can't write into zoning that ISD gets the discretion to determine what is just too odd, that we're just not gonna apply the rules. So we have to write that, write that in ahead of time in a way that makes sense and can be broadly applied to lots of all different shapes and sizes.
You get to come to us with language for an odd-shaped lot.
Well, this is what we have, right? So this is our proposal. And not defining an odd shaped lot, but putting in sort of the backstop.
Right.
So that you're not overly penalizing those lots that don't have much frontage. Or have odd frontage that doesn't really relate to the rest of the lot. So that's where it's either the first option, which it sounds like Councilor Wright threw out 50 feet as a sort of threshold for the exemption. Where if you have less than 50 feet of frontage, this wouldn't apply, and you would continue to build as you do today, controlled by setbacks and other dimensional controls. Another option is just to set an absolute minimum. So no matter what this results in, you get at least 25 feet, for example, of width for your house.
But, I'm sorry.
Or you apologize, Jennifer?
So, I'm just sort of thinking, so then we would need to know how many lots we have in the city that are less than the frontage, less than the 50 linear feet, just a, ballpark number. So that then we know just how many lots.
Well, then, Councilor Albright?
So if you had a lot of 59 feet. The rule 60% would apply, and what's the width?
37, almost.
37 feet.
Almost. Right?
What side lot?
59, just shy of 60.
So you get 35.4 feet.
And I wonder where the setbacks are in a situation like that.
So 59 minus 50 is 44.
So you have 9 feet difference,
Right.
9 feet wider than the setbacks, is that?
No,
Less. You end up with larger setbacks until you get to, it's at 37.5 feet, where 60% is equivalent to 15 feet. Which is generally the setbacks for an old lot. anything below 37.5 feet for a nice rectangular lot, your setbacks are gonna be, the one, are gonna be what's controlled.
So, can I just ask a clarifying question? If you
Councilor
said,
Baker.
well, yeah, thank you, apologies, colleague, but I hope this is helpful. If you had the baseline being that 60% frontage is your baseline. But if that is a number that reduces it below what the setbacks would be, the setbacks control. I mean, is that effectively what your first option is?
So that works fine again for rectangular lots, where
Right.
that becomes an issue is the odd shaped lots.
Right, and
Where-
that doesn't solve it for
It
that.
doesn't solve the odd shape, so if you're just talking a rectangular lot, at some point, the 60% just doesn't matter,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And you're controlled by setbacks, and that's fine. What is a problem is when your frontage is 12 feet, but you actually have a much larger lot to build a house on, because if you had a rectangular lot that was 12 feet, it would be unbuildable.
Right, so I think the question is, what I'm hearing is that if the frontage is small, so that you can't have any kind of percentage of it, you're basically just relying on the setbacks.
If you do the exemption of exempting lots under a certain frontage, because if you don't do that, like 531 Hammond, you're not just relying on the setbacks because you can't really build anything. You can build a 7-foot wide house. Whereas if that was, if you have a straight rectangle that's
Right, that
30
the
feet.
rectangle was easy.
The
I'm
rectangle's
just trying to
easy,
figure out the
These-
application of your proposal.
Yeah, you need some sort of exemption or, floor that you can't go below for the width of the house.
Yeah.
To make sense.
Can you explain the second option a little bit, because I'm not quite clear that I get it.
Yeah, so that's saying in, these odd shaped lots, let's go with Hammond. We applied the 60%, that house, even though it's set way back and on a pretty large lot, could only be 7.2 feet wide. With this, with that provision, you could have at least 25 feet. So that you'd never go below 25-foot width of a house, unless your setbacks don't allow for 25 feet. No matter what the 60% got you. Now here, you'd probably rather just have the exemption under 50, because that's still a pretty large lot. And is, expecting to build something wider, longer than 25 feet.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how that second option would work on that funny lot on Hammond Street.
It would give you more than the 7 feet that applying the facade ratio, having no exemption would. I think you're probably better off with just exempting under 50
Yeah.
or under a number, because 25 is still gonna be pretty small for this lot in this house.
Yeah, I think I like the first option better too. I'm not sure what the right number is, whether it's just under 50, under 60 or 50, but
Yeah.
I like the first option.
I think I'm persuaded that, we're trying to improve the situation here, that we're not gonna be able to solve all problems, so we were trying to avoid creating new problems for people in the process. So if the first option seems to me captures most of the situations of oversized lots, leaving aside the one-story exemption, we haven't talked about that at all, but just the base idea. And then saying, okay, for those below that, we're just gonna leave them alone because of the peculiarity of the nature of the process, and so there will be some exceptions, and maybe we come back and someday and say, how did we let that happen? But it's better than all of the other ones getting built the wrong way.
Yes, agreed, and those are gonna still be somewhat rare, we have to account for them. But what we're trying to solve is generally the homes that are on the street on a relatively normal lot, which this would capture.
And I guess I would prefer the lower number, just because that gives me a better shot at capturing the marginal properties. And if it's gonna be But that still leaves plenty of room for somebody to build, it seems to me anyway, so if I would go with the 40 feet, if I have a choice. In your range, I think that minimizes the number of exceptions, but still doesn't create a hardship.
So, and if I may, just. It's after 10 o'clock. I'm just curious, how many more kind of scenarios do we have solved? Or in part or in whole, in front of us yet?
Do you mean the other three questions?
So, right, yeah, the 3 more, yeah,
Those are easier, I think.
okay,
Well,
all right.
some of them.
I mean, I can go to 42. I mean, not 42, but 40 also.
40 as well.
40 or 50, either one.
40 seems too low for me to exempt 50.
Well, it's a
50
small lot, yeah.
times point.
Yeah.
What am I doing, 60 times?
What's that,
30
what would
feet.
that lead
Yeah.
to?
Well,
So you got a width of 30.
yeah,
Okay.
40 would give you 24 feet.
Yeah.
At 60%,
Yeah.
it feels
which is
narrow.
much more restrictive than
And I,
setbacks would be, right?
Well, when you get to 40, you're basically the setbacks.
Right, yeah.
That's why I.
Okay, and then I'm persuaded to go with 50. I'd rather get the committee to get to a consolidated recommendation.
15 above at 60%.
Right. I realize we're gonna have some things that have slipped through the cracks, but I'd rather not create hardship for people by state, and I'd rather capture the big items. So you persuaded me. That's yes.
Okay, the next one I think is interested with a little bit as well. But this was about what counts towards the facade. So initially, we were proposing everything counts. As we got into writing the ordinance and spending more time with ISD and current planning, I got concerned that you're really limiting options for additions on existing homes. And that you weren't really allowing for that sort of articulation, or weren't incentivizing that articulation.
So isn't this for just tear downs? And we weren't talking about existing homes, so this is gonna apply to existing homes?
So splitting zoning between just what gets torn down versus existing homes is in practice incredibly difficult to do. So if we don't want people building out across the whole facade, we don't really want them adding on to an existing house. It's not really any different than if they tore down and started over. There's also you create lots of loopholes when you start defining full demolition or tear down. There's lots of sneaky ways to get around that. You keep a little bit of this here, you keep stuff there.
That's what we went through.
Part of the foundation.
15 years ago. You remember that? Because people were holding on to a wall. And
Yes.
saying that they'd saved the house.
Wow. Yes, we strongly advise against trying to delineate in that way. It sounds great in practice, it's incredibly difficult. So when we came back last time, we had proposed exempting anything more than 10 feet back, which is how the garage ordinance is defined as far as the facade ratio there. And thought this would help incentivize some differentiation articulation. I think there was a lot of concerns with that, rightfully, that 10 feet, as we started looking at more examples, really doesn't read differently from the street. It still does read as one sort of facade. So this is under that proposal, the purple areas are what wouldn't count towards the 60%. So we took another look at this as well. And I think there's some options here if you want. I think the challenge here is having some level of flexibility, particularly for existing homes. We were a little concerned the more time we spent with it, that are we in some sort of inverse way incentivizing a tear down when you're so limited in where you can put in an addition on your home?
So a couple of ideas here. Set a greater distance for that exemption. Initially, we went 10 feet just to, it's consistent with the garage ordinance, having the same sort of rule, but with different. Or, you know, same sort of term or definition, but then different rules throughout the ordinance gets a little confusing. But we could set a larger number. We could set a different facade ratio for portions that are further set back, so you get a sort of larger ratio the further back it is. Or instead of the sort of setback, how far set back it is, focus on height. So we had already talked about exempting when the full building is below 1.5 stories. And so we looked at what that sort of looks like when you also exempt those portions. Of the three, I think that's probably the most promising one, as far as incentivizing the sort of thing we'd want to see, as well as being able to implement it. And we did have a max height on that as well. I think it was at 18 feet when we defined that exemption previously. So this would allow you to go to the setbacks as long as you stay below the 1.5 stories, while the bulk of the house will be held to the 60%. There is a precedent sort of for this, you know, your like center entrance colonial that has those sort of wings that are 1 story on the side. We see quite a bit of, or just like the 1.5 story garage on the side. So to allow for that, it would give a little more flexibility as far as, you know, creating an addition on an existing home. And you can't really, you wouldn't get the full sort of 2.5 stories setback to setback that we're seeing today. So this was, this is, I think, where we're leaning on this one, if we were going to exempt some portion of the house.
Councilor Ray.
So 1.5 stories is held home, 24 feet,
18.
18. Okay. Again, and you're saying we can't really do it. I have not a problem with this for existing houses. What I'd rather see for new houses is, you know, is it 10 feet or 20 feet setback and either 70% or 80% of the facade. I mean, they're starting from ground zero, so they can do that. Versus here, you know, you have an existing house and it's a little bit harder to say, we're gonna add on 20 feet behind the house. Maybe your house is only 20 feet, you know, deep, so. And you wanna have it on the side, so I mean, for an existing house, I think this is okay, and you're still doing the setbacks. But I have a little bit of an issue with this for new builds.
Could we do something like that we do with accessory apartments, which is, you said for 6, the building's been in existence for years and then.
Yeah.
Let us spend a little more time thinking about that, and how it applies here.
So,
No, go ahead.
so if the 60% would apply, but the exemption is for any addition that would take you up to, that's 1.5 stories, and the setbacks would apply.
Right.
Okay. So, but you can't do a 2-story addition on one side or the other.
Not beyond that 60%. You could have the full 2.5 stories within that 60% of the lot, so say that's 40 feet, right? Could be 2.5 stories, and then you could go further out to the sides, up to the setbacks of 1.5 stories under this proposal.
There's a few houses, I mean, there's a bunch of houses on Commonwealth Avenue on one of my walks that have 2-story additions on either side. I would love to know if, I'll get you the addresses
Yeah,
and
we
find
can check
out if
what
they're 60% or what.
The one caveat I have is that the impact on the abutters is significant still. It maybe reads from the street less obtrusively, which is the public space. But I'm a little uneasy about what happens to the folks next door, because, you know, if you're right up against it, you're right up against it either way. I mean, that's the, so, can you go back to your other recommendation
Yeah.
just for a minute?
Yeah, so, set a greater distance for what counts towards that front facade, so I think 10 feet's the wrong number. But you could exempt portions of the building that are further back. Or set two different ratios, so one for the front facade and then one that kicks in at a certain.
That has a certain appeal to me, because that really does tend to avoid part of the distinction between old and new, which is part of what you're trying to make this less complicated. So I guess I'd like to revise my thinking a little bit. I'd like you to look at the second one a bit, because it seems that there is a way of saying there's still gonna be some restriction, but there's a benefit to you to be a secondary facade. But there's not gonna be, you can't go quite as far as the setback.
But this is 2.5 stories up too.
Yeah. But at least your distance is greater.
And if I may, I would concur, I think the second option at least is still in keeping with the original premise, which from my mind was always get off the lot lines.
But my issue is with an existing house though, and you wanna put addition, you know, your living room's right in the front and you wanna make it wider. Now you can't do that, because now you gotta push it back.
Well, that's right. That's the whole idea.
Okay.
Councilor Getz?
Well.
Was that a?
He's-
You
I'm
just
over here
turn
raising
your
my
couch this way instead of that way.
Okay, great, so it's interesting to me, but I actually think the 20, like in that slide that has the 3 houses. This one, it looks like, you see kind of the one on the far right, it looks like it's pretty far back. I mean, it looks like it's at least 20 feet, I cannot tell, that's an old house. But what I'm suggesting, it doesn't have the presence on the street at all, you know, and it sort of feels like, is that a, you know, it feels like it doesn't read like it's, you know, part of the front facade at all. You know, and whereas you know, this distance is significant in all of these, you know, the middle one is more towards the front, but this one on this side, this new construction looks like it's half of the house.
Yeah, that one's
Yeah,
set
so
further
it's
back.
pretty set back, so I think I like the idea, and I hate to disagree, but 20 feet seems like a pretty reasonable number to. You know, but I would love to know the numbers here, you know, because but it's at least half of that house, so it feels like it's 20 feet.
So maybe on this one, we need to take a little bit closer look and provide some more examples and the numbers that go along with them.
The appeal of the second item is that you've still got greater than setback results.
Yes.
Which is what you're trying to get at.
Right, for larger lots,
For
and
larger
a
lots.
certain
Yeah, I
lot
mean, you've
size.
taken the
You're
smaller
at
lots,
setbacks,
obviously, doesn't apply. So some version of that. I would support, but I don't know.
So in this one, in that one, the secondary facade would not have to be set back, it would be.
Well, we would still have to define what that secondary facade is, right? So it would still be a number,
It would still
whether
be
it's
set back.
10 feet or 20 feet or whatever, that it's set back from the front facade.
Yeah.
And then it has different rules.
But I would say 15, just to distinguish it from the garage ordinance, but not require spikes of the.
This is making rules that really are very different from the houses we have in Newton now, I think.
And I wanna sort of play some of these out a little bit further too and test them, do some more test fits, because. Again, we still wanna keep this relatively simple because it's applying so broadly across the city, and then it's generally by right construction, so we wanna keep the rules pretty clear. So I think we need to spend a little more time maybe looking at each option, and we can do some more tests.
I guess the flavor of what you're saying though is that. It's an advantage to have something greater than the setbacks result, unless it's a really small lot or an odd shaped lot. And so how we get there is another.
Yeah.
Okay, Good questions of 4.
All right.
Handled.
Okay. This one, I think
Hey,
it's
I can
pretty,
count to 2, right?
it's pretty straightforward, just we got, some concerns about creating a nonconformity. So basically, if an existing house exceeds the 60%, and it becomes nonconforming, there's always the special permit pathway. If they want to further extend that nonconformity, you can also alter other aspects of the house that don't make that nonconformity worse. So if you're like this house, if we do count the wings, is at 71%. Again, our previous proposal was not to count those wings, but if we do count them, you're at 71%. So you actually could come in and seek a special permit if you wanted to turn one of those into a second story. So there's always a pathway if you're not conforming to have some level of flexibility.
Where did we say that the wings weren't gonna count?
I said our previous proposal
Okay,
on the previous slide
Okay.
was that they wouldn't count.
but it
So-
seemed like nobody agreed
Nobody-
to that.
Yeah. So if you count them, this is not enforced.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm on this bandwagon. Cause I see so many houses with wings. Yeah, but as I said, I'm gonna give you some addresses.
Yeah.
But they still would exist. What we're saying is they can't add those wings. Like that, but if they're already there, they're there. Now, but if they wanna build above it, it would be a special permit.
But if you look at them and they look fine, why would I wanna stop that? You know what I'm saying? I'm just wondering, what are we trying to achieve here?
Well, I think part of it is again, the
Cumulative
interest and the cumulative. That reads to me a much bigger house than the one on the left. Even though it's only just adding a story on top of something already there.
And the proposal for the exemptions was not to allow that.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
For the 1.5 story. Actually, if we did that option, this would stay as is, because it would comply and it would be conforming. So they couldn't add that second story. If we don't accept those wings, then actually they could add a second story by special permit. Because we're making them non-conforming instead of conforming.
So we're dynamic.
Yes, you actually can do more if you're not conforming than if you're conforming.
Weird anomaly.
Yes. I don't think there's much that we need to really update here, just wanted to be clear that there's a pathway if we are creating nonconformities. And then the 2-family, and are we sort of unintentionally forcing what is a very long facade? There are 2 fronts on the street to flip sideways in some cases, and is that turning away from the street? We think this can be addressed, but needs to be sort of addressed separately through the 2-family definition. And I think by modifying that to take out sort of the restrictions that garages can't touch each other or can't touch living space, you get more flexibility in how you configure the space. Can also consider requiring at least 1 front onto the street.
What was the reasoning that the garages couldn't touch living spaces?
So it's the the way the 2-family definition is written, you have to have sort of a continuous like line dividing the 2 units and.
But why is that, though? I understand what it is, but why is it?
We tried to change it a couple years ago. We proposed changing it. I don't know that it was the intent when it was written. I know there were provisions put on so that they weren't really separated and held together by sort of a tenuous connection. But the words that were used have the consequence of being defined in the building code as far as living space to not include garage. So the way that has been implemented has been that you cannot have in your line dividing your houses, a garage touching a garage, so they can't ever be next to each other, which is why we end up with 2 driveways, because they have to get pushed out to the side, and you can't have a garage touching living space. So you're really limited in flexibility in how you design the two families, it's kind of why they all sort of look the same. We think for a lot of reasons that definition should be updated. But if we move forward with this, I think it makes it even more important that that get updated, because if you do see that two families sort of rotate. You want to have a little more flexibility in how those units connect to each other. And I think you do want that front unit to have a strong sort of presence on the street.
But you can require the one presence on the street now, can't you?
Well, you're so limited in where you can put things, and you kind of, the garages are forced to be at the end. So you actually can't really do that well, because once you take the sort of rectangle, right,
Right.
and you flip it sideways. And the garages have to stay at the end, yet that garage is at the street.
I got you.
Right, so it does make it practically hard to require a like real front there, because you want a front door into living space, a porch, those sorts of things. Which is challenging or sometimes impossible to do with the way the two family definitions are.
Can you carry on with what we're doing though, without doing this piece, and you still defer that?
Yeah, I think we want to separately docket an item to address that.
Yeah, I understand,
Yeah.
but but we can still get this done.
Yeah, I think we can still get this done, we should just relatively quickly move to the, address the two family and not wait too long.
I understand, but I don't want to necessarily have them linked in a way that,
No, I don't think they need to be,
okay.
and
So
that's what we have.
I guess the question is, do you come back to us with another iteration?
Mhm.
And how long?
I wanna get, yeah, maybe May, I don't know that we can. Let me see, cause I think we wanna get UTL back involved to do some sort of test cases here.
We have May 10th is our next
Yeah.
substantive meeting, we've got budget in the meantime.
Right.
So that give you almost a month. But
Yeah.
is it really a month?
Not really. Yeah. I don't know if that's enough time, but. Let us take a look, and then when we have our next planning meeting.
Yeah, we have a planning meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Right, so just think about that if you would.
Yes.
you know, I mean.
Okay, so we got through
Councilor Fry.
4 items. Sorry, are there questions?
We're done. I think we're
All
done.
right.
We have
Move hold.
We have a motion to move hold. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Abstentions? All 3 items are held. That is the last 3 on the list
I
here.
think we're getting closer.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely remainder of your evening.
Whatever it is.
Thanks for hanging with us.